Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm glad that you guys can join me. As I always say, if you are under the sound of this voice, you have my appreciation for being under the sound of this voice. It is Thursday, 11/20/2025. And we are heading towards the end of the week. Okay, can't do it. All right, fair enough. We are heading towards the end of the week. We have a lot of interesting news, but I see my guest is here. And so I want to go to my guests. We are joined with John Helmer. John, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
Thank you very much for having me, Jamal. Glad to be here.
No, thank you for joining me. I deeply appreciate it. John Helmer, he's the longest continuing serving foreign correspondent in Russia and the only Western journalist to direct his own independent bureau, absent of national commercial ties. He's a regular presenter on Russian topics in China, Western Europe, and the United States, and has published several books in the United States on military and political topics, including essays on America presidency on urban policy in the United States, followed in book compilations in 1981, 1982, essays on Greek and Middle Eastern politics between 1986 and 1989. And since 1989, he has published almost exclusively on Russian topics. John, I followed your column, Dances with Bears, for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a great honor that you can join me on this one. I really appreciate it.
Well, honor's a big word, Jamal. Let's get to the facts, eh?
Fair enough. I sent a few questions, but let's start with this one. The new push for, quote, negotiations, unquote. Now, Axios came out with this, Financial Times followed up with this, and there is, according to them, a, quote, 28-point plan. Some people have described it as a surrender document for all intents and purposes. Give me your take on this. Do you put any credibility behind this? Witkoff and Kirillov has been in conversations about this apparently. And I mean, this is in the middle of all sorts of chaos that's taking place in Kiev right now. Umarov apparently has fled the country. Well, a rumor has it that Umarov has fled the country. The energy minister has fled the country. There's belief that Yermak is on his way out. Zelensky is apparently flown to Istanbul to meet with Witkoff. Do you put any credibility behind this notion of a, quote, 28-point plan, a peace initiative? Oh, by the way, and the Russians say they have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, lots of questions there, Jamal. Let's try to sort them out for our audience. Let me make it kind of clear, because you introduced it, that folks at home can disagree with us, disagree with me, and to assist you to disagree with me or to confirm with me what we're talking about. There's the website Dances with Bears that goes up for this program immediately afterwards, and we'll see all of the written materials that you've just referred to and more. So taking that as a reference, this is the short read of what I think is happening based on talking to my Russian sources about what's happening. The Russian view is that the US is in retreat, that Trump is retreating. Trump cannot appear in front of his MAGA constituency. He cannot appear in front of himself to be anything less than a winner of wars. You know, he has portrayed himself not only as the peacemaker deserved the Nobel Prize, but let me just quote you what he said on the deck of the USS Harry Truman in celebration of the birthday of the US Navy just a few weeks ago. Listen to this. We, quote Trump, we won World War I. We won World War II. We won everything in between. I'm looking down to read it exactly. These are his words. This is Trump talking. We won everything before. In Vietnam, the Navy unleashed Operation Rolling Thunder and deployed a brand new unit, the Navy SEALs, to tear up the Mekong River Delta. With Vietnam, the problem was, we stopped fighting to win. We would have won easy. We would have won easy in Afghanistan. We would have won every war easy, but we got politically correct. I'll finish there. This is a man who believes that sort of stuff. The problem is that coming up against a serious and real army like the Russian army, he's losing. And gradually, the message is getting through to him. It's gotten through to Vice President Vance. And it's certainly got through to Stephen Witkoff, basically a bagman for President Trump and his family. What they have leaked, this 28-point plan corresponds to the 31-point plan, which the Russian side tabled in the beginning of June in Istanbul when it was meeting the Ukrainian delegation. If you take out 3 of the points at the end of the Russian plan, which were, this is how it'll be ratified, this is what the effect is of the signing points at the end of that document, you've got 28. 28 points now represents the Russian framework for ending the short war. And I have to emphasize that what we're talking about here is a settlement of the short war. There are several major Russian documents that go back to 2021 that would resolve and end the long war that Russia understands it is being forced by NATO and the United States to fight, and not simply on the Ukrainian battlefield. The short war is coming to an end because Russia is winning definitively and is advancing across westwards, up and down the line. The Ukrainian forces don't know which way the Russians will come. And there's deep strikes, including last night, as far deep into the west as Lvov. So what the Russian sources believe is happening is this. There have been several tracks for negotiation. On the one hand, there's the Lavrov Foreign Ministry track. On the other hand, there's been the Witkoff Kirill Dmitriev track that basically represents, on the Russian side, Dmitriev represents the old oligarchy, the structure of business that wants an end to the short war as quickly as possible and relief from the sanctions so they can get back to business as usual. I have to point out that there is a rising economic power. You could say a new oligarchs, but that's not quite right, which is Russian commitment to the militarized economy, quite different from the old oligarchy. And they understand that Russia must continue to fight a long war. The US has no interest in the major disarmament START treaty type negotiations, and has in fact no interest in negotiating anything except extracting itself from this losing war. And that, therefore, what the Russians see and what's leaked into Axios, Politico, the Financial Times yesterday are basically the Russian outline presented in June for demilitarizing the Ukraine, for confirming the four regions, not simply Donetsk and Lugansk, but also Zaporozhye and Kherson, and of course Crimea. A deep demilitarized zone between their borders and across the Dnieper River to the west, which would be demilitarized. That is to say, no heavy weapons, no capacity to fire long-distance rockets, drones, or missiles into the new Russia or into the hinterland of traditional Russia. Okay, so then there'd be no NATO base, no US intelligence or Anglo-American intelligence sharing or European intelligence sharing to feed that long-range attack capability into Russia. that's the structure. I could go on with it, but and you can read some more in Dance with Bez if you want more detail. But essentially what's happening here is that Trump's covering his retreat by kicking up sand, by making it look as if he's initiated these terms. In fact, the record shows from 2021, when the Foreign Ministry presented its long war resolution, a non-aggression pact with NATO, a non-aggression pact with the United States, and that was rejected by the Biden administration. Since then, President Putin presented in June of 2024 the simple version of the solution on the Ukraine battlefield, and we've had the negotiations in Istanbul, followed by the Anchorage summit. Now, the Russian side thinks that there were understandings reached, but we know from the record that President Trump and others, Treasury Secretary Bessent, for example, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, have all flip-flopped and made it appear as if no understandings were reached. The Russian reaction to the so-called leaks of the new 28-point plan has been to say, on the one hand, that Maria Zakharova, the spokesman for Foreign Minister Lavrov, has said, we've seen lots of these articles. They're not coming to us. There's no negotiation with the foreign ministry. Dmitry Peskov, spokesman for President Putin, I'm looking down to give you the right language, said yesterday, Moscow and Washington are not working on any new initiative regarding the Ukrainian settlement beyond the agreements, plural, reached by President Vladimir Putin and US leader Donald Trump in Alaska. As for the new US negotiator who's surfaced instead of General Kellogg's been fired and has announced he'll be retiring in January. Okay, that's a Christmas present. Kellogg's going out with Santa Claus. But he's been replaced by serious people. Kellogg is a loser of a general and a retiree. But the U.S. Army Secretary, Daniel Driscoll, has been accompanied to Kiev with two serious generals, active service military officers. And this is a significant change in the way in which the Kiev regime, the Zelensky regime, the Zelensky Yermak Budanov regime has been presented with the facts. So the Russian side thinks Driscoll's appearance with the two generals, sorry, I've had their names in the top of my head today, but I have to also remember everybody else's names, so pardon me for forgetting. The fact is that Kellogg is out, and Kellogg represented what the Europeans, particularly the British, and Zelensky wanted to come back to Washington. This time, Driscoll, the U.S. Army Secretary, a good university chum, Yale University chum of Vice President Vance, has gone with active service generals to tell Zelensky, this is it, you're losing, and we can't save you. So these are the terms. Now, what President Putin's spokesman Peskov said yesterday was that there are no plans for communicating with Driscoll. What's that mean? It means that Driscoll's job was to tell the Ukrainians it's over. And if you don't agree now, you'll have even less, including you may be dead. So there's been a significant shift in US approach. It hasn't been seriously negotiating with the Russian framework, the 28, the 31 points, okay? Not serious since June, flip-flopping. This time, because the Russian advance on the ground, the Russian advance with the electric war campaign far into the west as far as the Polish border has been now accelerating. So the message is getting through to Trump. If he doesn't stop it soon, he will not only have inherited Biden's war, it'll be his war, but it'll be his loss. Yeah. His loss. And that Trump can't bear personally. And when you look at the polls, he's already suffering serious reversals in the polls. Nothing he's doing, none of this alleged peacemaking stuff has made any difference to the serious negative approval rating. He can't get better voting support out of, quotes, peacemaking. Why? Because most Americans, and you know very well, Jamal, are preoccupied with his dismal approach to inflation and all the domestic issues.
Yes.
So we've got a retreat. That's it, folks. Trump's losing. Trump's running away. Now, that's not going to be a headline you'll see in the mainstream press, is it?
It's not, but it sounds more accurate. What do you think the chances of this going through? I mean, up to this point, we've seen these kind of, I don't know, on and off peace attempts, quote unquote, for the last, 8 months, 9 months. Do you think this time around it's different? Because this time around, it seems that the Russians are asserting themselves so much more so on the ground, not to mention the budgetary issues that Ukraine is suffering.
I think you put it very well, Jamal. I can't put it better. The Russian side has demonstrated that it's not going to budge on the terms. If the US side doesn't come to terms, and let's forget immediate ceasefire and all the stuff that the Europeans have insisted on when they were sitting in the Oval Office, whether it's Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, or Alexander Stubb of Finland, or the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, or what have you. Leave that. That's gone. It's going. Now, we'll probably come in a minute to why they won't accept that it is going. But Trump's getting there first. He can't afford to be seen to be running away. He can't afford to lose. He hated the prospect. Remember, he often said it, of Biden's rout in Kabul, the sight of U.S. Aircraft and U.S. personnel being rushed at the planes as the Kabul occupation for so long collapsed overnight, as it were. So he can't afford anything like that. And he's getting there quicker than the Europeans. And the Russian point of view is that he's getting the message, and therefore there will be a coming to terms, which is what they thought and what Putin thought happened in Anchorage.
How could the Russians trust this? I mean, I would say there's a lot of people on my channel who will look at this and say to themselves, the United States has effectively flaked or lied about every deal that they've been went into. I mean, how would they ensure that this is legitimate?
Well, you're right again, Jamal. I mean, this is about war. It's not about words. Words on paper are promises, promissory notes, and Trump has an entire career of failing to deliver on promissory notes, doesn't he now?
Yeah.
So this isn't about trust; it's about war, and the war is the short war, because this is not an end to the U.S., German, British, Baltic. I mean, we could go up the northern front. I'm waving my hands around, pointing at the non-existent map. This isn't about the U.S. pulling out of its war aims, its war-fighting aims against Russia in Europe, its war-fighting aims against China in Asia, its war-fighting aims against Iran and the Palestinians in the Middle East, and so on. Those wars are not over. That's the long law. This is to pull out before there's a Kabul-type disaster, for a political disaster at home for the folks at home, or a Saigon 1975 kind of disaster. This is what the U.S. side is doing. Now, on the Russian side, and you mentioned it again, and thanks for mentioning it, Jamal, you've got different channels. You've got Kirill Dmitriev leaking and speaking to what is it called, Politico, right, and Axios, saying he'd been closeted with Stephen Witkoff in Miami for 3 days and nothing out of program. Well, there are factional jealousies on the Russian side, and they represent different elements of thinking about what the solution should be. Don't take that stuff seriously. Take what's happening on the ground seriously. And I think that's the answer. Your question was a good one. Can the Russian side or can either side trust each other? No, but capitulation, something else. Possession of the territory is 9/10 of the law here.
Yeah. It's a capitulation. What are the Europeans getting out of this? I've watched. I've been. I don't want to use the term confused, but for all intents and purposes, Europeans have stumped their feet without. I think somebody used the term without any swords, and have effectively said no to pretty much everything. And yet they don't have the military capability to do pretty much anything on the ground, and yet they've continuously said no. And this is as their economies fall apart, as German economy goes belly up. What is their end game in this? What are they trying to accomplish with this? I mean, despite the fact that the Ukrainian military is collapsing on the ground.
Well, each country's different. Yeah, we don't have time to go through the politics of each country. So let me try and sum it up. Maybe I could say, to take your last phrase, what's the European endgame? The European endgame is not to have an endgame. After all, politics is a short-term business. You've got, let's say, Chancellor Merz in Germany got at the last German election less than 28% of the vote, and he rules a weak, divided coalition. Yeah. President Macron of France can't get much more unpopular. I think the polls show less than 15%. I've seen numbers like 11%. You don't get less popular than that. And essentially, he rules by decree, by manipulating the French constitution, dividing and ruling a divided Assemblée Nationale. He rules as a weak ruler by decree and appears to be strong. Prime Minister Starmer in England won a landslide election and has lost almost all of that support, and risks losing to the Reform, this new party of Nigel Farage, is currently polling better than the governing Labour Party. So, and we could go to the Netherlands, we can go to Finland, we can go to Belgium, we can go to Italy, we can go to each of these countries. And what we're looking at are relatively weak coalition regimes which are trying to avoid the next election or losing the next election. What are they committing to? Well, first, they can't allow the United States to ruin their economy even more with Trump's sanction schemes. This is disastrous for them, and he knows it. So he's extorted the so-called 5% increase in GDP, for defense spending, which is a classic gangster extortion, because that extra 5% defense spending to protect them from damage to their domestic economy through US tariffs must be spent on buying US arms. Yeah, this is the deal. Okay, I'm sure you have in previous programs explained this very clearly. Well, what's the politics of that in each of these weak political regime countries? The politics of it is to make politically successful this type of militarization. And you can see it in Germany, pardon me, the big winners of this militarization of the German army, a major German arms builders like Rheinmetall, ThyssenKrupp, and others. If you look at their share prices, they're terrific. They multiplied 3 times the share value in the 3 years of since the war began in the Ukraine in earnest. So the militarization for Germany serves domestic economic interests, and they're cashing in on it first. Second, that translates into regional voting patterns. Yeah. So the idea is to make enough people satisfied, or that this war can go on because they profit from it. At the same time, you have near total command of the mass media in each of these countries. Each of these countries have successfully persuaded the voters that to believe that Russia wants to invade them, attack them. The British have been persuaded by the Novichok fantasy that Russia will come and launch chemical warfare attacks as they did in Salisbury back in 2018. It goes on and on. The Polish, we've seen the Polish leadership recently blame the Russians not only for flying drones into their airspace, not killing anybody, by the way. They now blame a bunch of two Ukrainians who ran across the Belarus border and put a few hefty pieces of metal on a railway track to prevent the trains moving. And this is blamed on Russia and the ambitious foreign minister of Poland, Radek Sikorski, who wants to be prime minister with this sort of doctrine, makes it clear that the Russians are to blame. The Russians are to blame. Well, Polish voters aren't so stupid, but this ideology is pervasive in each of these countries. The mass media accept it, and the regimes generate significant economic gains for themselves, their political supporters, their corporate supporters. So in each country, the economics and commerce of continuing the war keep these regimes in power. What must not happen for them is the same problem that Trump faces. They must not face a decisive capitulation in Kiev. A capitulation, Zelensky jumps on a plane and goes to Israel, or almost worse, the Syrskyi, the general commanding, is replaced by one of the Azov candidates, the Azov, the neo-Nazi groups, Beletsky or one of the others. If there's a revolution from the neo-Nazi direction, that would limit the Ukraine to basically a rump state ruled out of Lvov. And the Europeans can't accept that the collapse of Zelensky, the collapse of Syrskyi, they can't accept a regime change like that. Okay? So they don't want an end game. That was your term. They don't want to come to an end game because they're profiting at the moment. And they've got to stretch the moment into the next election cycle. That's my understanding. And I think it's the Russian understanding of why the Europeans are as adamant about continuing the war. They simply can't accept now that they're losing.
but their economies are taken, like, if you look at the number of jobs, for example, that Germany has been shedding, they've been bleeding jobs, like hundreds of thousands of
Yes.
jobs. France, they were screaming headlines that France and the UK were needing a bailout from the IMF. That's how bad their economies were effectively doing. As you point out yourself, all of these governments are effectively very weak governments. Starmer's like 30 points underwater, if I remember the latest polling on
Yeah.
him. It doesn't seem like this has been a benefit to any of these countries in an economic sense, in real terms, or in a political sense.
You're right. You're right, Jamal. It's not a benefit for the country as a whole. It's not a benefit for majorities of the populations, but it's a super benefit if you run Rheinmetall. Your shareholding, your share prices jump by a magnitude of 3. Your bonuses, your take-home pay, all of that stuff is you're in a boom. You're in a boom, and it's not just the big arms companies, the little ones who want to list on the stock exchange and generate the kind of share price gains, which turn into worker salary increases. Yes, they also turn into much bigger bonuses for the executives. And some of these companies, it's not so clear in Germany, but in the United States, where military defense companies are prospering in much the same way, they're paying dividends, pardon me, by borrowing against their future procurements from the US government. In other words, so long as there's, war making is a government priority, and the defense budget gets bigger and bigger. Some of them aim to make money on the Golden Dome in space, some of them, and so on and so on and so on. So long as there's the perception of, rising defense spending by war against Russia or China, major companies like Lockheed and major defense contracting companies borrow money to pay their shareholders dividends and bonuses. It's essentially a cycle of militarization in which you get a narrow group of people. It's narrow. You're right. The majority of the populations in each of these countries, including the United States, understand they're suffering from this. But look at what happens when they protest. You have the same kinds of repressive tactics that we call ICE in the United States on the streets of DC or Chicago or LA or Seattle or wherever, or Memphis, Tennessee, and with a whole other list of cities to come. Similar repression in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
You can hardly open your mouth like you and I are talking in Germany without somebody filing a complaint with a local city prosecutor and popping you into court, facing major fines and possible imprisonment.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I'm curious on something else. In the old days, I remember Colonel McGregor made a point of saying in the old days, the United States would tell Europe, this is what we're doing, and Europe would just kind of fall in line. Do you see that happening this time around? If Donald Trump is indeed sending his people to effectively tell Zelensky, this is what you're doing, you're losing, you're failing, we can't save you, etc. This is the deal. We need you to accept this deal. Does he have the capability? Like, meaning, how much influence do the Europeans have in, let's say, either putting the kibosh on this deal, stopping this deal, etc.?
Well, here we are on a Thursday, and we don't. You said it right at the beginning, Jamal. We don't know what will come next. Let's just say for the last few months, the Europeans have been very effective in persuading Trump to flip from what he described as a grand settlement for the security of Europe to immediate ceasefire I mean,
Right.
he's actually said, I don't support immediate ceasefire because they don't hold unless you get a much more profound and comprehensive security deal. I mean, perfectly reasonable, common sense. He took that position and then reversed himself. You've got to give in answer to your question, you've got to say the Europeans successfully persuaded him to change his tune. But he changed his tune for his reasons, not for theirs. Mm-hmm. And he has to believe he controls Starmer, he controls Macron, he controls Merz by the force of the tariff war. And until and unless the US courts rule that Trump's use of the tariff weapon domestically is unconstitutional and blocks the use of the tariff war in that fashion, until that happens, Trump's use of the tariff weapon makes Europe behave itself. It can persuade him for his reasons, but he can't believe that they're being persuaded. He thinks he can persuade them for his reasons.
Right. Interesting. If we are looking at the U.S. do this kind of new push for a deal, does that imply that this attempt to seemingly weaken or get rid of Zelensky, the political chaos that's taking place in Kiev, is coming out of the U.S., or do you think this is coming from somewhere else?
No doubt, and no doubt that most of this attack on the corruption around Zelensky is coming from the U.S. The origins of the two, let's call them anti-corruption groups, NABU, the investigative force, and SAPO, the prosecution force. The origins of those groups was the Biden administration, George Soros, and the USAID program. I can recommend, I'm a Russia correspondent, and and my ability to look inside Ukraine internal politics, let alone what's happening on Bankovo Street, where the Ukrainian government hangs out, is limited, very limited, and has got weaker over the years. So if you go back to Dances with Bears between 2014, let's say, and 2017, I did focus a great deal on the corruption of Igor Kolomoisky, stealing billions of dollars, diverting them from the National Bank of Ukraine through Privatbank and into a whole range of assets inside the Ukraine. The Kolomoisky versus Viktor Pinchuk oligarch battle was fought out in the British courts to some extent, and that enabled me to get access to a lot of records. When they stopped litigating against each other, my access has been much more limited. But there are good Ukrainian coverage that you can see. Okay? Peter Korotayev writes a Substack called Events in Ukraine. And he has a capability to understand and describe the faction fighting. There are two factional fights going on. One, the one you mentioned, Jamal, around Zelensky. Between Zelensky, it's a succession fight for political power between former President Poroshenko and Zelensky and his advisors, particularly Andrei Yermak. The level of corruption actually identified is relatively small. I've called it elsewhere, chicken feed by comparison. You know, the Timur Mindic character, it has been stealing dozens of millions of dollars. But we're talking about a bigger level of corruption that's billions and billions of dollars. The Mindic scandal, which has been gripping the Western press as well as the Ukrainian press, it doesn't and won't remove Zelensky. It's designed to soften him up not replace him. That's Korotaev's conclusion. It's a reason on the evidence he presents, and folks can go to events in Ukraine, Substack, Korotaev, and you'll read it, and it shows a level of understanding of Ukrainian politics. It helps to be Jewish. It helps to have been born in Dnipropetrovsk, and it helps to know how to steal millions and billions of dollars. Those are the three qualifications for understanding Ukrainian politics right now. But relying on his sources, Korotaev takes the view that this is a limited, call it a limited hangout anti-corruption operation to soften Zelensky up without removing him. One. The second succession operation is only partly connected, and that's the general staff, whether General Syrskyi can survive as the commander, whether General Zaluzhny, now essentially a British asset sitting in London, comes back either as a political leader or as a military leader, or whether military power passes from Zelensky, Syrskyi, Budanov, the head of the group, the intelligence service, whether it passes from them to the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi groups, who remain fanatically committed to fighting Russia forever. I can't tell you. I don't know how it works day by day, and I can't tell you that the two succession fights in the Ukraine, the military one and the civilian one, the Zelensky versus the Azovists, the Banderists, how it will pan out. I can't tell you that. And we don't yet know whether the US intelligence agency, the British intelligence agency, the French and the others have a view about who they would like to see emerge in the general staff and in the civilian leadership. We haven't seen any of that yet. What they must achieve is softening up Zelensky to come to terms to stop the Russian rush at Kiev.
But would the Russians accept Zelensky, that government remaining in power? It seems like we're just okay.
No, one of the terms in the 31-point Russian plan is there must be an end to mobilization. There must an end to martial law. Once martial law comes off, presidential rule by decree comes off, mobilization stops. There must then be an election. And the Russian side has repeatedly said that no longer refers to Zelensky as the president. I don't refer to him as the president because he doesn't rule with constitutional legality. So the Russian view is there must be an election. Who would win that election is another matter. There are Russian candidates. There are Russian-supported candidates. Good people like Oleg Tsarov, who's has been a Ukrainian presidential candidate whom Kiev tried to murder, who lives in Crimea and writes a very interesting telegram roundup each day. Folks at home can look up Oleg Tsarov, Tsarev. He's a candidate. He's a potential candidate, but seen to be rather close to the Russian side. There'll be others in the middle. There'll be others on the right. Let's put it this way. If you look at the combination of the Russian plan, I'm waving my hands around because it's kind of complicated. I'm pointing in different directions. If the Russian plan of the 31 points is adopted in full and all the pieces work together, you've basically got the 4 regions plus Crimea remain Russian as they are now constitutionally. Second, you have a demilitarized zone in which you have no threat to Russia. Then you have a limited Ukrainian security force for domestic security purposes, but which cannot become a threat to the neighbors, but principally Russia. You have an election, and essentially you've got an election for a rump state. And you may find that that rump state peels off because the Odessans will say, we're better off joining Russia than staying with the rump state that's either based in Kiev or based in Lvov. The same may happen in Kharkov, and the same may happen in Dnipropetrovsk. In other words, from Russian point of view, if Russia can be patient, and if the risks of continuous warfare are diminished significantly, those parts of eastern Ukraine will vote their wallets, will go where the money is, will go where the reconstruction investment will come from, and that's Russian.
It's part of the softening operation, getting rid of Yermak. Is that, I mean, he's been Zelensky's chief of staff. They've called him Zelensky's brain of sorts. And now the rumor has it that he is on his way out. Or do you accept that? Or do you buy that?
I'm old-fashioned, Jamal. I can't cope with rumor. And,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
I mean, it just, the standard of the journalism that applies in Russia as everywhere has got to be the courtroom standard, evidence beyond reasonable doubt or evidence on the balance of probabilities. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the faction fighting, as I said, in the Ukraine is best described by Ukrainians. That's not me. I don't know enough to answer your question.
That's perfectly fair. One last question on this. The Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. I've been fascinated by that. It sounded as if, at least to me, when Trump and Putin came out, that there was some kind of deal, that there was some kind of agreement. Lavrov has continuously talked about this as being an agreement, and he has been, I'm not going to say spilling tears over it, but effectively over and over again saying, we had a deal, we had an agreement, we had an understanding of sorts. Yes. And of course, Trump immediately went back on it. Was there an agreement? Was there an understanding between these two that Trump eventually pulled back on? Like, meaning, it sounded as if when they gave their speech that there was something on the table, that Witkoff came with a deal. And the reason why I'm asking this, because this is the way I understood it at the time where they were giving their speech together at the summit. Witkoff came with a deal. The Russians maybe amended, updated, or basically gave their take on it. The Russians were waiting for a response. Trump's response was effectively enacting an oil war where he was going after the Russian energy sector, not to mention trying to get India in order to stop using Russian energy. Start screaming about tomahawks. And you get Lavrov saying, well, we were waiting for him to respond. And my thing was, well, he sounded like he did respond. Yes. Was there something on the table at the time?
You put it very well. And I have to agree with your account. Let's just remember there's some peculiarities about that summit. In the first place, it was supposed to last more than 4 hours. It was supposed to have a luncheon in the larger format, to go from the smaller format of Trump plus Rubio plus Witkoff and the counterparts on the Russian side. Then there was the larger delegation luncheon, and then there was with more discussion. And then there was to be a joint press conference that was scheduled to run for an hour. And pardon me. And then Trump had a scheduled interview with Fox News, I believe. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened was quite different. We know what was scheduled because the State Department papers, the protocol lists, the schedule for everything that was to have taken place, plus the timings, was left in a printing machine and leaked to the press. The press picked up these papers. I've read them, and they showed that, for a start, that all of Trump, that Trump basically said, "I've had enough. I'm going home," and he cut the he eliminated lunch. He eliminated the large delegation meetings. He eliminated the large press conference. The press conference was scheduled in the State Department papers I've read for something like 45 minutes. A normal press exchange Q&As with the press for Trump and his guests. It was cut to, if I'm remembering rightly, 12 minutes, and each man read something, and 8 of those minutes I've stick in my head were dominated by Putin reading, and 4 minutes by Trump. Trump conceded that because he had a 30-minute interview with, I believe it's with Heritage of Fox News, but I may be mistaken. He then had 30 minutes with Fox News for his press conference with a reporter who was slobbering all over him. Yeah, so it wasn't a press conference. It was a polish. It was a makeup job to polish his face, and then he got in a plane and went home. So, what can you do in roughly 2 hours? The answer then is what you said. The Russian side insists, as repeatedly said, there were understandings reached, plural, or agreements reached, plural. On the other hand, some senior deputy foreign ministers have said that whatever was understood has been violated. There's been no follow-up. The Americans have failed to do anything that was understood to be moving ahead at the end of the Anchorage summit. Mm-hmm. They've been, as it were, corrected by endless repetition on the part of Mr. Lavrov and President Putin and their spokesman. Keep reiterating there have been understandings reached, there are agreements reached. Take your pick of which version, because why don't we just accept that the Russian side believed that Putin had presented to Trump in language that Trump understood, that these were the Russian terms, and if he and if the United States and the other powers didn't agree to negotiate the terms and provide the security arrangements Russia wanted, Russia would take them by war on the battlefield. And that was different and important compared to Stephen Witkoff showing up in the Kremlin and discussing terms with Putin, with Dmitriev on one side of the table, Ushakov on with President Putin. It's a different conversation. And not one of the business projects, we're not even talking about the Bering Straits tunnel that Dmitriev surfaced, none of the serious stuff, resumption of air flights between, let's say, Moscow, Washington, and New York. None of that. No improvement in Boeing's or ExxonMobil's relations with Russia. Nothing has materialized from any of the, let's say, business relations that Witkoff talked of at the time. So it was reasonable for Putin to say, for the Russian side to say, well, let's see if Trump understands what Witkoff has been telling us Trump understands. So when they went to Anchorage. They went there at Trump's request. Remember, Putin wanted to meet in Dubai, a neutral position. No, Trump said, I'm only going to go as far as Anchorage. And but which is fine. Symbolically, it meant that a Russian president was once again welcome on U.S. territory. So the Russian side wanted to see if Trump understood. And the understanding part seems to me to reflect the fact that Russians believe Trump understood. The agreement part was each of the elements improving the relationship between the two diplomatic corps on each side, the return of Russian diplomatic property in Virginia and in Seattle. All of that stuff would be negotiated. All of it's failed. Wow. Nothing has materialized. So we can say there were agreements to go on agreeing, negotiating, but nothing has materialized. So we could also say that the US side has violated what the Russians believe were agreements. But what we can't say, at the core of your question, was there at Anchorage a presentation to Trump and an interaction on the terms for ending the short war, the Ukraine battlefield war? Was that in discussion? My belief is no. Trump didn't get as far as understanding what the terms would be. But now he does, in the sense that now he understands since August the 16th. Let's calculate. We're just past November the 16th. August, September, October, 3 months. In 12 weeks, the situation on the battlefield looks far more dire for Zelensky and threatening for Trump than Trump understood then to be the case. You're right, Jamal, you made the point. Trump gets very aggressive in the between towards Putin. I'm disappointed. Every time he'd go in the back of his airplane, he would tell the reporters, I'm disappointed with the guy. And I mean, he repeats himself, disappointed. And then that's followed by, exactly as you said, some tough stuff. I'm going to send tomahawks. It keeps podcasts alive. Every time he opens his mouth like this, tomahawk is tough on the military side. Let's leave aside its feasibility. Then we're going to stop oil trade with everyone who buys Russian oil, starting with Europe, but also with India and China. And we're going to hit them. Well, they did eventually hit Rosneft and Lukoil, and it causes some disruption. But you look at the oil futures price and you see the market understands there'll be some disruption for a few weeks or months, and then the effect of the sanction will be neutralized. Yes, Russia will get less. Against the oil price, there will be a bigger discount for the middlemen. Everybody will make money. Russia will make less. But the war
keeps going.
It doesn't stop.
Let's move for a bit. I want to go to the UN Security Council resolution on the quote stabilization force unquote. Yes. There has been a lot of I would use the term anger. I'll use that term. There's been a lot of anger out of certain circles on this issue of Russia and China not necessarily using their veto in order to stop this from going through. Now, both Russia and China put out a rather brutal statement, effectively pointing out this is nonsense. It's going to be the opposite of what they're calling for. They listed the failings of let's say, the UN resolution, UN Security Council
Yes.
resolution, but they abstained. And
Yes.
people are like, how are you listing all of these failings associated with this and yet abstaining from using the veto, from
Yes.
putting a stop to it? Give me your take on this. What do you think was going on in Russia and China's mind? And I read their response to this, by the way. But again,
Yes.
it's like okay, well, if it's that bad, then how are you not putting a stop to it? The U.S. had no issue putting a stop to also when the United States was calling for when the rest of the world was calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The
Yeah.
United States by itself uses veto over and over and over and
Yes.
over again. And when it finally agreed, they used the term, they said, this is a non-binding UN Security Council resolution, so we don't have to pay attention to the fact that this UN resolution is passed. So when people
Yes.
look at that, they think to themselves, okay, well, Russia and China clearly are not in favor of this. And yet
Yes.
they let it go through either way. Give me your take on this. What is going on in their minds?
Well, a couple of bits of background. For 2 years, I was an advisor to the Secretary General of the Arab League. So I know a little bit about Arab politics, but that was a long time ago. I've written a book called The Jackal's Wedding, American Power Arab Revolt, as a kind of history of Arab resistance to the war against the Arab world. But I left all of that behind when I moved to Russia. And so I'm a bit out of Arab politics. But let's start with the proposition which I mentioned before. In war, and Hamas, the Palestinians are at war with Israel, and Israel is in genocidal war with them. In war, words don't count. First point. Second, the UN Security Council and the United Nations have already discredited themselves, and the UN Secretary General Guterres have all thoroughly discredited themselves from Russian point of view in the current war in the Ukraine. From a Russian point of view, Guterres has been consistently biased in favor of the Ukrainian Anglo-American side. And Russia's been the only power in the UN Security Council to attack Guterres directly and personally for his betrayals of his independent, neutral role. And put his name into Dances with Bears and you'll dig up all sorts of awful stories of Guterres's involvement during the Battle of Mariupol to try to rescue some of the Azov brigades operating in bunkers deep underneath Mariupol. I won't go into the individual stories. My point is the UN Security Council has already discredited itself. Its words don't count in war. And in the Russian war, the UN Security Council has repeatedly taken against the Russian side. So the problem of the credibility of the UN Security Council, its veto, its words, its resolutions, Russian side has no illusion about how empty it is. And therefore, we come to this problem. UN Security Council Resolution 2803. It was rushed through the process. And the principal opponent of the US draft was Russia, not China. Yes, at the end of the process, and I put them up on Dances with Bears, you can read the explanation for the abstention of the Russian side and the explanation of the Chinese side for abstention. The process, in that process, 3 states, members of the UN Security Council, opposed the UN resolution, the US resolution, 2803. Russia, China, and Algeria. There were 2 Arab states who are members of the Security Council, non-permanent members. The 2 Arab states are Somalia and Algeria. There's Sierra Leone as a Muslim state, but let's not get into that part at the moment. Algeria was opposed. Ultimately, Algeria voted for the resolution. It didn't abstain. So here we have a problem. The problem is Russia, and I'll just go through the process because UN Security Council is a war of words. And in the war of words, there's a problem of how to say, very reasonable, moral people are very angry, just like you said, Jamal, at the refusal of Russia and China to veto this. And I'm going to try and explain why in that process, one can understand why Russia did what it did and why it didn't cast a veto. The process started with the US, with Michael Waltz's draft of the resolution, opposed by Russia, China, and Algeria. Russia comes up with an alternative draft resolution.
Right.
The US then issues basically an ultimatum to all the Arab states, all of them, including the Palestine state, the Palestine Authority, Mahmoud Abbas's entity. Either you vote for this, or we take significant retaliatory measures. What happens is that it's very difficult for the Arab states, certainly with the way the Arab League works. If you've got Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan is part of this, but it's a minor state. Qatar and the UAE are not minor. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE are financial powerhouses. Egypt is a major Arab power. All of them not only supported the Trump plan when first announced and celebrated with him at Sharm el-Sheikh, but they were joined by Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, major Muslim states in endorsing the plan and then the resolution. So what the US did, the US delegation, was to line up all the major Muslim powers and all the major Arab powers, plus Mahmoud Abbas, to show the Russians first, but the Chinese second, they were totally isolated. And they were. And they admitted that even Algeria flipped.
Yeah.
So when the Chinese and the Russians hand out their explanation statements, they say much the same thing. We opposed. These are all the reasons we opposed, but we were faced with a united Arab bloc that asked us not to veto. And we maybe don't get into the reasons for non-veto, because essentially everybody, including Hamas, agree to the ceasefire and want to protect the remaining Palestinians from further genocidal war by the Israelis. We can go on, and I respect those who point out that Russian policy in the Middle East has faults. It has not mentioned the word genocide. It has not criticized Israel for genocide. But we're not here to get into the long history of Russian Middle Eastern policy, its failures in Libya, its failures in Syria, and so on. What you asked was how and why Russia abstained, China abstained on 2803. And their explanation is we faced a block of all the Arab states and the Turks, a major strategic ally in Russia's war against US sanctions. They asked us not to veto, and we abstained. Now, here's the kicker. The kicker is in the Russian statement, but not the Chinese. The Russian statement is the UN Security Council has no legality. It cannot violate international human rights law, and it cannot deprive the Palestinians of sovereignty. It cannot deprive the Palestinians of the right to defending their sovereignty and themselves. The Hamas statement says all of this. The Russian position is nothing the UN Security Council says in words makes a difference on the ground. The Russian side's been very clear. The BOP, the Board of Peace, chaired by President Trump, with a new British overseer like Tony Blair, or maybe Tony Blair advised, helped with his hand held, or some other part of him held by Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff and the others, will now have a new mandate over Palestine and over Gaza. And the genocide will continue by less than warring means. Look, it's very clear that's what's happening. And it's a war that Hamas and the Palestinians must fight. And they've been doing remarkably well at fighting, making Israel go the long war, which Israel cannot sustain. It can't sustain a long war against Iran. It can't sustain a long war against the Houthis. It can't sustain a long war against Hamas. As weak, as divided, as destroyed as Hamas, Hezbollah, the so-called axis of Arab resistance with Iran, has, no matter how weak they are, in that war, they are doing what they can, and the UN Security Council's BOP, its transition military force, its selected Palestinian technocratic stooges, all of the structure of the Trump plan, which is annexed to the resolution to make it look even more kosher. None of this is all words on paper. If from a Russian point of view, and a veto would have contradicted their acceptance of the ceasefire itself. The UN Security Council doesn't add legality to the facts on the ground.
I see.
I'm not excusing. We're not having a moral conversation here.
No.
I've heard reasonable people of goodwill who understand Arab politics, who are angry, who are right to be angry, of course, and I share that view. But to misunderstand what the Russians thought they could do in that limited arena, using a UN Security Council that's totally discredited already, what could they do? And this is what they did against a US attempt to make the fantasy of the BOP, the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, and all of that, make it look as if it's got legality from the UN. It doesn't. The legality was set out by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion late in October. Could the Russian side have said, we will we will adopt the ICJ advisory opinion and state that this resolution has no legality. We'll veto it because it didn't have any legality. We will veto it because it doesn't assure Palestinian sovereignty, etc., etc., etc. Well, it could have done so. And if you're sitting as an armchair general or an armchair Arabist, you could say Russia blew its responsibility. But armchairs a long way away aren't the way this war of words is fought in the UN headquarters. And anyway, each of these states calculates the UN Security Council 280, Resolution 2803 is a dead piece of paper when it comes to Gaza. Hamas will fight on, but Hamas's statement, look at Hamas's statement. It repeats these major goals for Palestinian sovereignty and the right of resistance, the right of self-defense. I don't need to tell everybody, so not you, Jamal. But Hamas's statement doesn't deny that it too accepted the ceasefire arrangement because it saves lives, Palestinian lives. It's not going to be demilitarized. It's not going to disarm. It points out that this resolution simply internationalizes the task the Israeli army couldn't achieve by itself. Now, the Chinese explanation, the Russian explanation, don't deny that reality. That's the reality on the ground.
John, I have appreciated this conversation. I really have. Thank you for this. Honest to God, great breakdown, great
don't
explanation.
Bring God into it, for God's sake.
It's figure of speech, just figure of speech.
Okay.
But no, I've genuinely appreciated this, honestly. John Helmer, he is, come on, there we are. He is longest continuously serving foreign correspondent in Russia, the only Western journalist to erect his own independent bureau, absent national or commercial ties. He is a regular presenter on topics in China, Western Europe, and the United States, and has published several books in the United States on military and political topics. John, and by the way, you can check his blog out on Dances with Bears. It is a fantastic blog. I've followed that thing for like a year now. Thank you for this. You be safe,
Thank
okay?
you for having me, Jamal. I hope we come back, and I hope that these tricky, complicated things that we've been trying to explain will interest our audience with your encouragement.
Oh, it does.
Look carefully before we all jump.
No, 1,000% it does. And I would love to have you back. I swear. Yeah, I would love to have you back. Be safe. Thank you, man.
Much. Cheers.
All right. Great breakdown by John. Fantastic breakdown by John. We're going to go from one good guest to another good guest. Caleb Maupin. How you doing, Caleb? You doing okay this morning?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I am doing all right. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. He is director for Center for Political Innovation, and a damn good friend of the show. So thank you for joining me, man.
Sure.
I would be remiss if I didn't get your take on kind of what John was saying at the very end, this idea of the veto. Look, I've heard that argument before of basically you have all of these Arab states, all of these Muslim states, all of them agreed Russia and China were isolated. And in the context of them being isolated, they decided to abstain for multiple reasons. One is the isolation. Two, they didn't necessarily want to ruin their relationship with the Arab states. Give me your take on that. I'm just curious. I mean, and there's the other third thing of this doesn't change any facts on the ground. Like the very basic question of, well, how do you plan to disarm Hamas? I don't have an answer for that. I don't think they do either. Give me your take on this.
Well, I think, unfortunately, if you listen to the speeches that were made by the Russian representative to the Security Council, the Chinese envoy, they were making clear that this is an awful situation. This is a bad deal that doesn't recognize the Palestinians and their sovereignty. It's a huge violation of their right to have self-governance. Basically, you're imposing an international body on them. But it's a question of, we vote for this, and this deal, has been accepted by the Palestinians themselves and by Hamas and by the Arab community, or we reject it, and then the violence starts up again and the killing starts up again. And I think that they thought, okay, well, we'll register our complaint. We'll make clear that we don't approve of this, but at this point, we've got the Palestinian leadership accepting it, and the killing stops as they implement it. Or we vote against this, and then we're back to the drawing board, and the bombardment from Israel starts up again. And I mean, it's not a good situation. It's not a situation where people can, say what should be happening. It's a question of what is actually going to happen. And it was either accept this deal or we're back to square one, and the bombardment continues. And, that's kind of where things are at. And that the Palestinians themselves did agree to it. So there you go.
I guess the question becomes, how do they even implement this? Like, I don't even know the pathway to implementing this. I mean, It seems like Israel is trying to get what it couldn't accomplish in a war through the UN Security Council. And it's like, okay, so who are the troops going to be? What are they going to be? Turks, Egyptians, Saudi Arabians? Like, who's that quote unquote stabilization force going to be? And is that stabilization force going to directly engage Hamas in order to disarm? Like, all of this sounds, it sounds like a plan without a plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw Donald Trump with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia at the White House, rolling out the red carpet for him and playing up their relationship. And, the relationship between the USA and Saudi Arabia is much more complicated than it used to be. It used to be, you basically just considered Saudi Arabia to be an outpost of Western, colonialism in the region. I mean, the House of Saud was basically selected by the British Empire. The Sykes-Picot Agreement put them in charge of the Arabian Peninsula. But now we have a situation where, because hydraulic fracking and deep sea drilling have gotten to the point that the world isn't dependent on Saudi Arabia the way they once were, you have the Crown Prince, who has centralized a lot of power in his own hands, and kind of trying to figure out like more independence for Saudi Arabia. And then the whole thing is Saudi Arabia wants to build nuclear power plants, and Trump is agreeing to help make it happen because he'd rather have American companies set up Saudi nuclear power plants than have Russian companies do it. Russia was told by Biden to go all in against Russia. They refused. The Saudi government refused to just cooperate, with the all-out anti-Russia campaign, because they need to negotiate with Russia about oil price outputs. And we have an increasingly independent Saudi Arabia, and we have the United States trying to use them in the way that they've used them before. Saudi Arabia also has to maintain its credibility, and right now they can't recognize Israel after everything Israel has done. They have to maintain an anti-Israel stance, and they've restored relations with Iran. For a long time, the strategy was to polarize the region between allies of Saudi Arabia and allies of Iran. But now Iran and Saudi Arabia have restored diplomatic relations. So we're in kind of a new ballpark, I guess. But Saudi Arabia remains a country that is primarily doing business with the Western countries, a huge purchaser of U.S. weaponry and U.S. military equipment, a huge supplier of oil, and kind of a middleman for ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. So at this point, it's interesting to watch what's happening. I wish people would take notice, though, that Venezuela is an oil-rich country that the USA is threatening to invade and overthrow because of alleged human rights violations or whatever. And it's like, and then Saudi Arabia, another oil-rich country, has no pretense of human rights at all. Everyone in the country is the property of the king. They still cut people's heads off. It's an autocracy in every sense of the word. And we're okay with that, right? And, Trump is there whining and dining with the Crown Prince. But then, look at Venezuela. Oh, we're just so outraged about these human rights issues, most of which are contrived to begin with and don't reflect the reality. I mean, the hypocrisy should be obvious to everyone.
Yeah. I mean, he chopped a man up with a bone saw. The CIA even pointed out, says, the MBS was the one who effectively ordered it. And when Donald Trump was effectively asked this at the White House, he comes up with Donald Trump effectively says bad things happen. Khashoggi was controversial. You shouldn't have to embarrass our guests like this. And of course, MBS is like, oh, it hurts us so bad. It hurts us that this has happened. I didn't know anything about this, of course, but we took all legal measures in order to look into it. It's like, get out of here. Like every intelligence service pointed out that MBS was directly responsible for ordering the guy to be chopped up. He was injected with something. They chopped him up. They dissolved his body in acid. And Trump is like, yada, yada, controversial. Things happen. Yeah. And then Trump even made this point of saying, well, he's done a great job on human rights.
Oh.
Really? Really? What do you make of this relationship? Donald Trump is saying that he's going to apparently sell them F-35s. Israel has obviously been against this, and yet Donald Trump is going to do it anyway. Some people have pointed out that this is a weakening of Israel's influence in the U.S. I don't see that, but maybe I'm misperceiving this.
No, I mean, Saudi Arabia is not an enemy of Israel. I mean, that's something that, I mean, their rhetoric, they criticize Israel. The people in Saudi Arabia are not big fans of Israel, but Saudi Arabia, they are generally an outpost of the Western system. They oppose Israel as a matter of principle as a Muslim country, but they're on the other side. The people opposing Israel tend to be the, Iran-aligned forces, the axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, etc. And Saudi Arabia has often played the role of fighting against those forces. Now, right now, they're in kind of an odd situation where, because what Israel is doing is so horrendous, they have had to de-escalate, their fight against the Houthis in Yemen. They've restored diplomatic relations with Iran, but they're not, Saudi Arabia is not a center of resistance by any means. Saudi Arabia, it's the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam, right? That is the basis for the Saudi monarchy. And they were selected by the British to be the rulers of that particular area. I mean, the borders of the Middle East have been drawn up completely arbitrarily. It's the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? The original WikiLeaks, you could say, was the Russian Revolution of 1917, that World War I was happening. And during World War I, the Bolsheviks made war against the war makers and took control of the government and overthrew the Tsar was overthrown, and then you had the provisional government. The provisional government was overthrown, and when the Bolsheviks overthrew the provisional government, they leaked all the secret treaties. And one of the treaties was where the maps of the Middle East had been drawn. The Ottoman Empire, Turkey, was on the side of the Germans in World War I, and they were losing. And after World War I, a new Middle East was created, and the Allied countries had drawn all the borders, and all the complicated borders of the Middle East that exist today come from the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was leaked, a secret treaty that was leaked by the Bolsheviks and made public. And if you look at it, right, the Arabian Peninsula, you have, the House of Saud, they got most of it, but then you have Oman and Yemen. You have Syria, you have the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, you have the Kuwaiti monarchy, you have Qatar, and all of that. It was very nepotistically done. It was certain families. The British kind of just handed out different areas. I mean, it was very much, and then the French got Syria, and I mean, it was very much a calculated thing, and those borders are artificial. And the rallying cry of the Ba'ath movement was there's one Arab people, right? That this is one nationality. They speak Arabic. They are one people. And these borders were drawn up, and these monarchies were created kind of artificially as part of a project for the British to dominate the region. And that the Arab people are one. You also have Persians in Iran. You've got Kurds in the region. You have different ethnic groups, and the modern Middle East, as we understand it, is a product of this secret treaty that the Bolsheviks made public, the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Yeah, and we've had chaos pretty much ever since the Brits have gone around drawing lines on the map. No, agreed. One of the other things that came up, as you point out, the human rights issue. In fact, I want to show the video. This is a news reporter asking about you chopping up Khashoggi and how Donald Trump doesn't seem to have an issue with that, and if the prince has anything to say about it. This is a wild clip, and this is this is a wild clip. I'm gonna get your take on this. Come on.
Got a conflict of interest. And Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office.
Who are you with? Who are you
Why
with?
should Americans
Who are
trust
you with?
And the same to you, Mr. President.
Now, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of the
But the
worst.
question is
One of the
legitimate,
worst
sir.
in the business. But I'll answer your question.
Thank you.
I have nothing to do with the family business. I have left, and when I've devoted 100% of my energy. What my family does is fine. They do business all over. They've done very little with Saudi Arabia, actually. I'm sure they could do a lot. And anything they've done has been very good. That's what we've done. We've built a tremendous business for a long time. I've been very successful. I decided to leave that success behind and make America very successful. And I've made America more successful by far than it ever was, and that it ever could have been, no matter who was president. There would be nobody bringing in $21 trillion. That I can tell you right now. As far as this young man is concerned, he's done a phenomenal, extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question. You know, it's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question. And you could even ask that same exact question nicely. You're all psyched up. Somebody psychs you over at ABC. They're going to psych it. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. As far as the Epstein files is,
That's outrageous. That is. And by the way, just to make this point clear, Caleb, Bob Woodward asked Donald Trump about this. And Woodward says, I pressed Donald Trump on MBS's role in the Khashoggi killing during a tape recording interview in 2020. He says, quote, I've gotten involved very much, Trump said. I know everything about the whole situation. So what exactly happened, sir? I asked. Quote, I saved his ass, unquote, Trump said. That's what happened. Saved whose ass? This is what Bob Woodward is asking. MBS, Trump said. They were coming down on him very strongly, but I was able to get Congress to leave him alone. I was able to get them to stop. You know, I'm very friendly with those guys. Which guys? The Saudis? Congress. I'm very friendly with Congress. And now Trump is like, he knew nothing about it. He knew nothing about it. Just outrageous. I'm amazed by that. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. There is an element. I will never forget the day. It was the night before Trump was inaugurated the first time. I was in Trump Tower. It was the day before Trump was inaugurated. They had like a last minute press conference at Trump Tower in New York City the day before the inauguration. And I was in the room with, hundreds of reporters and all of that. And I saw what happened, right? Where that was when I was the reporter from CNN. Right. They brought the microphone over to him. He started to ask the question and then they took it away. And then Trump says, don't be rude. Don't be rude. You're fake news. The whole thing was completely set up. It wasn't that the guy asked the question and Trump shut him down. They brought him the microphone to let him start asking the question. It had all been planned. And Trump said to him, you're fake news. And that's when fake news took off. Right. And it's this like theater. Right. Like it was arranged that they were going to let him start asking the question. Then they were going to cut him off. And I remember the term fake news had been going around before, right, as an allegation against Russia. Right. It was that, well, Russia had been promoting all this fake news on the internet. And that's how Trump won. And so then Trump brilliantly hijacked the term fake news and made it his own and called CNN fake news. And that's just a big part of Trumpism, is this kind of performative fighting with the press, scolding the press, criticizing the press. And it's like, I'm against the mainstream media and the mainstream media are against him and they performatively fight him. And I watched that and I'm kind of annoyed with that reporter's tone, because there is this element of like, the USA coddling the Saudi autocracy is like something that's been going on since 1945. But
Right.
suddenly it became an issue, and it's just a Trump problem, right? It's just a Trump problem, right? And that's what annoys me. And so her tone is like this very performative, like, oh, blah 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 blah. But then on top of that, Trump is like overreacting in this way that is like his base loves that. They love the way he's talking, and it's like, oh, he's sticking it to the mainstream press. And you know how hard it is to get White House press credentials? I mean, if they didn't really like that woman being there, they could easily just not let her in the room. There's plenty of people who'd like to be in that room and have White House press credentials and don't get it, right? They wanted her there. They want her there to act that way. So then Trump can, oh, you mainstream media, I don't like you. You're a bad person. You're awful. Yeah. I mean, it's all just theater, and it just annoys me that it frustrates me, I guess, that people don't see through this on some level. Like, she's only in the room because they want her there. Right. She's only asking the question about this in like a harsh manner because Trump is the president. And then Trump is making his big show against her because he loves that, because he needs to look like he's against the mainstream media. And it's all just performance. I mean, there's no, if they really wanted to protect the king from questions like that, they could very easily do it. They wanted that question to be asked. They wanted Trump to performatively go after the person asking the question. I mean, it's like all of that. They have total control over all of that. And they had it happen that way. That was total. That was not a spontaneous occurrence by any means.
I agree with most of what you said. I think the media takes issue with the murder of Khashoggi. If I had to point the finger to anything out of it, because I think from their point of view, okay, this guy was a journalist of sorts. He was working for the Washington, right? He was with the Washington Post.
Yeah,
and he was murdered effectively for his, for whatever was taking place in regards to Saudi politics and his relation to Saudi politics. He was in the U.S. He goes in order to get a certificate in order to get married, and he knows he's in danger. He goes for love and gets murdered. And so if you're a journalist and you're in media, you're like, whoa, that's outrageous. Now, from Biden, when he was on the campaign trail, if you remember, Biden called him like a thug, and I'm not going to shake his hand and all of this other stuff. Whereas Donald Trump.
Then he did. Biden went to Saudi Arabia and was begging them, please cut off Russia. And I mean, Biden did completely. Yeah, I mean.
He did a 180 and he fist bumped him. Because he didn't want to shake his hand. But I'm saying, I guess my point is, on the campaign trail, Biden was very hyped up about attacking MBS, whereas Donald Trump was always very conciliatory. And I remember when they brought up the Khashoggi thing, when it first happened, Trump looked over to one of his guys and says, how much money is other Saudis investing in the U.S.? And they told him like 20 billion or whatever that number is. And at that point, Trump was like, okay, well, Khashoggi, he's complicated. Like, that was, meaning, I agree with you. It's performative. I agree with you. They can get rid of that woman if they want to get rid of him. But I do think the press has a bee in their bonnet about the fact that one of theirs was chopped up and dropped in acid.
Well, the Saudis are Republicans. I mean, this is where it gets a little complicated. But the Saudis, they tend to be aligned with the Republican Party, because they purchase weapons in big numbers and they are tied in with the military industrial complex. Whereas the liberals, the intelligence agencies, the CIA, as opposed to the military industrial complex, they have courted the Muslim Brotherhood as proxies. The Muslim Brotherhood's illegal in Saudi Arabia, right? In Saudi Arabia, they absolutely hate the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they are the westernized Muslims or whatever. And they're who the main activist force that the liberal Obama wing would like to align with, right? And the Saudis, they are all about military force, and they're Wahhabis. They're both Sunni Muslims, but Sunni Islam is divided in two, right? There are Sunnis and there are Sunnis, right? In the Middle East, and when you talk about Islamism, you're dealing with three main currents, right? You got what the Saudis are. They're Wahhabis. Right. They want to go back to the 1400s. They, it's like they want to do everything exactly as it was done in the time of the Prophet. They talk about Salafism or whatever. A lot of them eat with three fingers because the Prophet ate with three fingers, right? They believe in having a monarchy because that's what was done at the time of the Prophet. That's Wahhabism. It's this very strict fundamentalist Sunni Islam. That's the Saudi monarchy. That's their ideology. That's Osama bin Laden. That's ISIS. That's That's, that's a very extreme, interpretation of Sunni Islam. But then you have another wing of Sunni Islam, what they call the Westernized Muslims. And that's the ideology of Turkey. That's the ideology of Qatar. That's Al Jazeera. And that's another axis, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's basically premised on the idea that the Western countries are more true to Islamic principles than the Muslim world is. And it's that, that in the West, because we have the free market, and because we have battered women's shelters, and because, we mow our lawns, and our lawns are perfectly mowed and very disciplined, I guess, that they said the West is more true to Islamic principles than the Middle East is. And that was like a religious movement that started in Egypt, right? And it's this Westernized Islam, and that's who the liberals tend to align with, and it's very much the Muslim Brotherhood. But then you also have the Shia current that's around Iran, which is that's anti-colonial, and like it kind of it fits the Islamic tradition in with this kind of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movement, tied in with the Islamic Revolution of Iran. So when you look at political Islam, you have those three currents, and the Wahhabis have always been kind of a Republican aligned thing. Wild moment. I remember when Muhammad Ali died. They talked about Muhammad Ali endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1984. And they said, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? He's associated with radical left activism and all of that. But in 1984, Ronald Reagan was getting reelected, and Muhammad Ali had a press conference. He said, I'm endorsing Ronald Reagan. They asked him why, and he said, well, he wants to keep prayer in school. That's enough for me, or whatever. It was a very vague thing. What was going on there? Well, Muhammad Ali had joined the Nation of Islam, right? And the Nation of Islam was like, the Nation of Islam, they're not Sunnis, they're not Shia. It's like a very specific interpretation of the Islamic faith that, draws from the Bible and talks about Black people in America, and has it's its own thing. But after Elijah Muhammad died, Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, went to Saudi Arabia, and the Nation of Islam converted to being Wahhabis. Right. And it was funded by Saudi Arabia.
Really?
And the Nation of Islam under the son, Wallace Muhammad, they became Wahhabis. Then Minister Farrakhan quit the nation, or it wasn't the Nation of Islam. He quit the organization that became Wahhabis and started the Nation of Islam again, that was true to their, original beliefs. But what called itself the Nation of Islam, after the death of Wallace Muhammad, or of Elijah Muhammad, became Wahhabis, and they aligned with Saudi Arabia. And that's what Muhammad Ali was. He didn't follow Minister Farrakhan to restart the Nation of Islam. He just, stayed in the organization that was led by Elijah Muhammad's son, that were Wahhabis. So he was a Wahhabi, and he was taking political direction from Saudi Arabia, and they were pro-Reagan, right? And Ronald Reagan promised, after the Islamic Revolution of Iran, he said, there will never be a revolution in Saudi Arabia. We will never allow it. And that Saudi Arabia, they're Republican aligned. I mean, Democrats coddle them too. They're a Western aligned country in the Middle East, but they tend to lean to the Republican side because they make lots of money selling weapons, and they're in with the military industrial complex. And the Democrats have this kind of fixation on the Muslim Brotherhood that has activists, kind of liberal activists, who go out in the streets and protest, and the Muslim Brotherhood is not trusted by the Saudi monarchy, and it's not trusted by the Republicans. The Republicans tend to be very suspicious of that, whereas Obama and the liberals, they're in with Al Jazeera, and they're in with the Muslim Brotherhood crowd. So that's kind of the point of disagreement there, right? And that you can kind of see that playing out. That the Muslim Brotherhood and their interpretation of Islam is something the liberals find useful, and kind of that was the Arab Spring and all of that. Whereas the Republicans tend to really like the Saudi monarchy is pretty straightforward. We buy weapons. We're an autocracy. That's kind of the issue there. So, I mean, all of this is all this stuff about Islamic terrorism and all of that. You have to remember, like, none of this would be an issue if it wasn't for the fact that during the Cold War, the U.S. government saw communism as the main threat. And so they enabled Saudi Arabia to spread its ideology all over the world. And Wahhabism really exploded because a wealthy young Saudi, the billionaire heir to the Saudi, the Saudi state monopoly on construction, Osama bin Laden went around the Muslim world recruiting Muslims from all over the world to fight the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. and spread Wahhabism. And Wahhabi, interpretation of Islam was spread all throughout the Middle East because of the United States kind of giving Saudi Arabia permission to do that to fight the Soviet Union. In addition to that, it's caused problems throughout the region. India really hates the Deobandi schools that were set up by Saudi Arabia. Muslims in India have been radicalized by Saudi Arabia. They've spread Wahhabism to Muslims in India. There's been a lot of terrorism and instability and violence in India and in Pakistan because of these schools that were set up by the Saudis in the 1980s, spreading the Wahhabi ideology among Muslims in India and in Pakistan. And that's a big problem for that region. And that Saudi Arabia spreading its Wahhabi ideology all throughout the region has been an ongoing big problem. And it's something the United States did. I mean, the United States allowed it to happen for geostrategic reasons. Zbigniew Brzezinski very much, that was his project, was creating the Afghan trap in Afghanistan, getting the Soviet Union into a situation where they had to militarily go into Afghanistan, and then making it a long, drawn-out conflict that would demoralize the Soviet public and giving the Soviet Union their own Vietnam, so to speak. And part of doing that was enabling Saudi Arabia to set up this network of very, very extreme fanatical Muslims, around the world. And that's where Al-Qaeda comes out of, and that's where ISIS comes out of. That's Wahhabism, right? It's one particular interpretation. So
so you don't take, just to be clear, you don't take this, the United States has apparently also made Saudi Arabia a non-NATO ally. That was one of the other things that have come out of this meeting. Saudi Arabia apparently is supposed to be contributing 99% of their economy to the United States in regards to funding. And I'm saying it that way because it's absurd. This idea that they're going to give $1 trillion in investment to the United States when their economy is like 1.1 trillion. This is nonsense. So you don't add anything more to this, that for all intents and purposes, Trump is doing this because of either investment and because of Saudi Arabia may want, let's say, more independent foreign policy or more independent streak in regards to their political policy. And Donald Trump is trying to get him closer to the
Saudi
United
Arabia
States.
is changing. Okay. And that is, that's something that the Crown Prince has been kind of the symbol of, is that world just doesn't need them the way they used to. We now can get oil from fracking, we can get oil from deep sea drilling, and we're not dependent on them. And so because of that, the Crown Prince, he kind of ascended into power, and there was a huge crackdown on corruption. I believe he turned one of the Hilton, or Hyatt hotels in Riyadh, he turned it into a prison, basically, where he was detaining people. Big crackdown on corruption. And he continues to float different ideas about, they would like to, have Saudi Arabia become something like Singapore, where, they develop, they've got oil and sand, and that's all they've got, right? They got oil and sand. They sell lots of oil. They buy lots of weapons. There's lots of sand. A lot of guest worker slaves that have about a third of the country, from what I understand, are guest worker slaves that have no human rights. And, the oil money is handed out nepotistically. The closer you are to the royal family, the more money you get. There's wild stuff like, in Saudi Arabia, your social status is your license plate, right? How low your license plate number is. The king has 1 as his license plate number, right?
Are you serious?
Yes. And so in
serious?
Saudi Arabia, if you want to show how important you are, you have a lower license plate number. So 100, 200, that's like, whoa, he must be really important, right? And there's a whole social social and they drive their, BMWs and their very fancy cars, but it's like, look at the license plate. You tell how important he is. And the oil money is handed out kind of nepotistically among Saudi citizens. Among Saudi citizens, the lowest people on the totem pole are the Shia Muslims, right? Shia Muslims are basically second-class citizens. They have to only work in jobs that do manual labor. They're considered to be apostates because they don't accept Wahhabism. They're Shia. And then a huge chunk of the population are not citizens. They are guest workers that have absolutely no rights whatsoever. I mean, when they come into the country, their employer holds their passport, and they're basically slaves. They can be tortured. They get tortured. They flogging, torturing. They're slaves basically. People from Bangladesh, people from the Philippines, people from the Pacific, and they have absolutely no rights whatsoever. And that's Saudi Arabia. But it's changing because the world doesn't need them in the same way. And so, the nuclear thing, that is what I take from it. I mean, the fact that there is going to be nuclear power in Saudi Arabia, and that American companies are going to make it happen. Now, why is that happening? Well, it's happening because Saudi Arabia wants to have its own electricity so that they can sell their oil, and so they can kind of start to develop some kind of economy in Saudi Arabia other than just oil, right? And that's what's going on there. And the United States would prefer they have American companies set it up rather than Russian companies set up their nuclear power facilities. And that's what I kind of took out of the meeting. But there was all kinds of things. When the Crown Prince was in, he was talking about flying cars, and he was talking about all kinds of stuff. I mean, they have to not just be the world's oil supplier at this point, because the world doesn't need them as an oil supplier, and that has created kind of an internal crisis within Saudi Arabia.
I want to move for a bit to Russia. Sure. Kellogg is out. Apparently, he got his walking papers, and apparently in January, General Kellogg is going to say adieu or good day. What do you make of that? I mean, because several things are happening at once. Ukraine is getting crushed on the battlefield. I mean, it's obvious at this point. I don't even know how anybody can spin this anymore, that this is a quote unquote stalemate. They are getting crushed. Aside from the rout, they're in financial dire straits. So $50 billion in the hole at the end of the year. Euroclear is not given permission to take the money, or let's say Belgium is not given permission to take $200 billion in Russian money. And Euroclear has gone so far as to say they would take them to the court if they indeed tried to do so. So you have a budget shortfall. You have Europe who can't afford the budget shortfall. You have a collapse on the battlefield in regards to manpower, capability, desertions, etc. And you have a corruption scandal that is rocking Kiev. I mean, like, it's an utter implosion in regards to the corruption scandal. And I just read on the thing where they're talking about Zelensky's name is in those files. I would say, obviously. Many of the people have abandoned Ukraine at this point. You have Yermak, who rumors saying he's going to be on his way out. Again, I want to stress rumor. Chief of Staff Umarov. I'm sorry. Yermak is Chief of Staff. Energy Minister apparently has fled Ukraine. Umarov has apparently left Ukraine and said he's not coming back. Again, those are rumors in regards to Umarov and Yermak. But obviously, there's a lot of Ukraine is being rocked right now from multiple sides at once. And then Kellogg is on his way out. Okay, that's interesting.
I will make a prediction of this. I will make a prediction. You remember when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, it was intended to be a smooth handoff. There had been negotiations for years going on in Dubai, and it was like, on this day, the USA will hand Afghanistan over to the Taliban, and it was supposed to be smooth, and it was anything but that. And it was utter chaos, and the airport blew up, and the military equipment was left behind. And you remember that? That's what's going to happen in Ukraine. They're trying their hardest to have a smooth handoff, but there's a section of the NATO intelligence, there's a section of the American deep state, there's huge disagreements about it. And what happened in Afghanistan, it was very clear that, that there had been negotiated. It had started quite a bit under the Trump administration and continued under the Biden administration. On this day, we're going to hand Afghanistan back to the Taliban. We're just pulling out. And there were forces that didn't like the Biden administration. There were forces that didn't want the handoff to happen, and they sabotaged it internally for political reasons. And it was an absolute disaster for the United States. It was just an absolute disaster. That's what's going to happen with Ukraine, right? And Trump is trying his hardest. He wants to make the handoff, make the Ukraine war end in a way that makes him look good, in a way that doesn't look bad. And I'm predicting that, just like the Afghanistan pullout was done in a way that it was sabotaged internally, I think Trump, as much as he's trying, the Ukraine handoff is going to happen. It's going to be a similar thing where they just say, all right, the war is over, and it's going to blow up in Trump's face. And Trump knows this, and he's trying to minimize it. He's trying to negotiate that the handoff, the ending of the war happens in a way that doesn't, just doesn't become a huge PR stain on his face. But there's almost no way to avoid that, because it's not just the United States forces that are there. I mean, there's the intelligence services of all the NATO countries. The British in particular are really mad. They want to keep this going. They don't like Trump. And that when the war ends, it's going to end in a way that Trump looks very bad. And Trump knows this, right? And he's tried everything possible, Tulsi Gabbard releasing the Russiagate file and all of this. But they're going to end the war. And when the war ends, the British, the NATO intelligence agencies, they're going to end it in a way that Trump looks really bad. And the consensus in Western media is, oh, look at you, Trump. You just gave Ukraine to Putin. Oh, man, look how incompetent you are. Look how awful it is. And that's how it's going to end. And there's really nothing Trump can do about that, right? And Trump is trying to avoid this at all costs. And he's trying to, I want to end this gracefully. I want to end this in a way that looks good for me. That's just not going to happen. The NATO forces are just not going to let that happen. It's going to end. It's going to end. Like, it's just going to end. Okay. We know that this war ends when the United States says it's over. That's what we're just waiting for. We're waiting for the United States to sign a piece of paper and just say, all right, we're done. And when that happens, NATO and the British and the Atlanticists and sections of the American deep state that are working against Trump, they are going to make it as big of a mess as possible. And I have no idea what they're planning, but there's going to be something. There's going to be some image. There'll be like some, I don't know, there'll be like some beautiful site in Ukraine where Russian tanks drive over it. Oh, look what they did. There's going to be some big image on CNN of what an awful thing Trump did. And there's going to be, I don't know, there's going to be, kind of like the helicopters in Vietnam, or there's going to be there's going to be a bunch of stupid media theater about how dare Trump abandon the Ukrainians. He left them behind. Oh, it's going to be horrible. And that's, that's just how it's going to be. And it's shitty. And that Trump would like to end this war in a way that makes him look good, but he can't. And they're not going to let him. And that's my prediction. So what do you think of that?
He should have just walked. Like when Trump, I keep saying this, man, like on day one, when Trump first got in office, if Trump would have said, this is not my war, this is Joe Biden's war, I'm out, I'm calling it a day, I'm walking.
Yeah.
He would have been far better off, because the problem is exactly the way you put it, right? Like, for all intents and purposes, what they're going to say is this is Trump's war. We're nearly a year in with Donald Trump effectively keeping this war going. And it's Trump that lost the war, is what they're going to say.
Yep.
And my thing is, either you're going to get blamed in the beginning, where you could have worked out a relatively deal. Yes, it's going to be Russian terms, but you could have worked out a deal. As opposed to now, where it's clear as day, when you have the New York Times writing articles saying, yeah, they don't have food, they don't have water. Bukros is surrounded. Seversk is, they're fighting in Seversk. Kupiansk is surrounded. Leningrad is effectively surrounded with Ukrainians surrendering en masse. Okay, that looks bad. That looks horrible, right? And you are the president who is presiding over that, as opposed to when you could have went with the lie of this is a stalemate, and I'm calling this a day under the terms of it being a stalemate. Those are radically different positions. One, you can't hide. The other one, you might be able to hide from and just say this is Joe Biden's war, this is his failings, etc. Now, I agree with you. I don't know how you get out of this looking, smelling like a rose.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right. If he had done this early on, it would have just happened, and then it would have been over with, and then they could have just moved on. But now it's going to be much more on Trump. He's going to be tainted by how badly it goes. And I mean, it's unfortunate, but I just wish they could just do it. And there's just no way around it. They're not going to be able to end this war in a way that makes Trump look like a big hero who stuck it to Putin, because that's just not the reality on the ground. And everybody knows that. And they're trying to think of a way they can spin this as, America got them and Trump, but it's just not going to happen that way. Russia won the war. They've won the war. They've already won the war. And so how long are we going to keep throwing bodies at this until we just acknowledge that Russia won the war? And yeah, it's really a disaster, and it's really, I mean, it's an episode of mismanagement. As much as I think the Trump administration was more independent and all of that, they don't really have their own agenda. They don't really know what they want. They are good at pounding the podium, like you saw with the reporter. They're good at this. Oh, we hate you, mainstream media, but they don't really know what they believe in. What do they believe in? They don't know. They believe America first, well, or Israel first, or they don't even really know what they believe. They're kind of hijacking anti-establishment sentiments that are widespread in America right now. They're hijacking the fact that people are angry about, how the living standard is going down, and they're trying to, and I will say a lot of the Trump administration, I mean, this is, the Steve Bannon strategy. It's, I don't want to be ageist here, but it's pandering to elderly folks, right? It's older folks vote, and especially in red states, older folks live in red states and they vote. And it's like pandering to the resentment and the bitterness of elderly folks. Well, that might get you votes and that might win elections, but it's not real policy, right? And that's a lot of what the Trump administration does, is just, you got, older folks throughout the Midwest and the heartland and the South who are mad about the way the country has deteriorated and feel betrayed. Give voice to their sentiments by putting another old guy, a quite old man like them, on television to, act and talk the way they talk. And, I've been hearing this for years, part of the America First rhetoric, right? Is this idea that the U.S. regime change wars are somehow like we're doing a favor for all these countries. I would hear that, like during the time of the Iraq War, most of the people in the area I grew up in just supported the Iraq War. But occasionally it would slip through of, why are we helping these Iraqis? Why are we helping them? Why don't we help people over here? We're not helping the Iraqis by blowing their country to shreds and violently overthrowing their government. But if you watch CNN, I guess that's how it's portrayed. And so it's this kind of like, well, we should help people here instead of helping people over there. We're not helping people over there. We're killing them and destroying them, and this idea that U.S. military operations and U.S. invasions are welfare or something. It's like, it's like we're doing these countries a favor or something. And, it's kind of accepting that neocon narrative, but just being bitter about it and wanting them to help us out over here instead of helping all those people over there. It's this very weird thing. Or, this notion that the USA is going around the world, giving stuff to people, right? They look at foreign aid and they say, oh, we just give all this money to foreign countries. Well, that foreign aid is to manipulate their politics. It is to destabilize countries. But again, a lot of conservatives, they accept the premise, the CNN mainstream media premise, that this is all just charity out of the goodness of our heart. But they're like, oh, we're being a sucker, I remember years ago, I was at an anti-war protest in Times Square, and there was a young man from Pennsylvania who had just enlisted in the Army. This was like late Obama years. And he came and he was arguing with us. And he was saying, well, the USA isn't imperialist, but it should be, right? It should be. I wish America was imperialist because I'm from this town and we're poor and all of that. And if the USA would just go around the world and steal stuff and make America wealthier, then that would be better. Well, yeah. And that's kind of, there's an element of that in Trumpism of like, this element of like, rather than the liberal pretenses of humanitarian intervention, let's actually be ruthless, right? You know what I'm saying? And that's, with the whole, Crown Prince thing, right? That was what Trump said, is that, instead of doing what the Obama administration did and pretending that Saudi Arabia wasn't so bad and all of that, Trump just said, yeah, they killed him, but we make money off of their weapons. We can sell them weapons, or Russia can. So I guess we just make money and who cares, right? And there's an element of that. And it's almost like, in a way, is it better or worse, right? Getting people to just be okay with brutal policies, right? That and then kind of playing into the idea that somehow that benefits us. I don't think American weapons manufacturers selling a huge amount of weapons to Saudi Arabia benefits you and me. I don't think that helps you and me, right? But the idea that it's okay to just be acting purely out of economic interest. It's kind of changing the script from the Cold War, right? During the Cold War, the narrative was America is the land of freedom, fighting the commies and all of that. And then the left, we would always point out, well, the USA is backing dictators. The USA is hypocritical. And there's kind of with Trump, there's an element of like, well, actually, yes, the USA is backing dictators. Yes, the USA is, acting selfishly, and that's fine because everyone else is selfish, and we just need to accept that. That's the way the world is. That's an element of Trumpism that is not so good, I don't think, right? And it equates the interests of the American people with the interests of American imperialism, right? And it's kind of like we want the USA to just be ruthless around the world because that's us, right? We're on that team too, and we benefit from it. And why don't we just lose all the liberal pretenses of humanitarian intervention and fighting for freedom and all that, and just have a ruthless government that just goes around the world plundering and all that, because we get some of the stuff for ourselves, and that's how it is, right? And that's part of the Reagan nostalgia, right? Is that you have this like, Reagan was not like Carter, right? Carter was very much, all about liberal human rights rhetoric and all of that. And Ronald Reagan was seen as this militarist, go get 'em. And that, that's the anti-communism, that you see in the Trump camp of, everyone's a communist, Mamdani's a communist, Bernie's a communist, that's part of that. It's kind of like under Reagan, we felt proud of America again, right? Under Jimmy Carter, he was going around apologizing. He was kind of doing this truth and reconciliation for the 1960s, right. But Reagan was like feeling proud to be American again. It was kind of a repudiation of the previous decade of confusion that came out of the 60s political upsurge. So I don't know, a lot of this. And then the other thing is that these folks are not going to be around forever. I mean, the Trump voter, the elderly Trump voter is going to die. And there's a lot of younger people in the Trump movement, but they have a different perspective. And like the Nick Fuentes stuff.
Did you see his clip, that latest clip that he put out, effectively saying, look, man, MAGA is dead. We need to move to a new political coalition, a left-right coalition. The left needs to give up. I think what he said, the left needs to give up immigration. The right needs to give up capitalism. It was something to that effect. And it's like, whoa. he was like that political coalition gets 90% of the vote tally. If Rokana and Thomas Massey coming out on behalf of releasing the Epstein files, that has 90% of the vote tally. And then he pointed out this other thing of like anti-Israel that gets 90% of the vote tally. And he was like, there needs to be a new political populist coalition between the left and the right. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. Shocked the hell out of me.
I mean, I am for that in principle, but I don't trust Nick Fuentes. And that there is some weird 3D chess that is going on right now, where Marjorie Taylor Greene is against Trump over the Epstein files, which is weird because it's like now Trump wants the Epstein files released also. I mean, we're not going to get they're scrubbing it. All right. Pam Bondi is going through there, and there are some prominent people whose reputations will be destroyed, but there'll be some sacrificial lambs. That's my prediction. We're not going to get the whole thing. We're not going to get the real thing. Right. My prediction is it'll be the Clintons, because they're not in office anymore, right? The Clintons, Bill Clinton is, former president. He can't run again. He doesn't have a plan to. We all know he's got issues with women. Let me put it that way. Like, that's no secret. And Hillary Clinton is, so embarrassed. And what came out in the Russia files about she's a drug addict, basically. She's got a painkiller addiction. She's psychotic. She, and all that. So she's done. So if they
wait, you lost me on that one. That came out in the Russia.
Yeah, that was part of the Russia release that Tulsi Gabbard did, was that if Russia had really wanted to help Trump win the election, they could have, because they knew that she's addicted to painkillers, right? And that she had this painkiller addiction, and they had emails and all of that. Russia had intelligence that Hillary Clinton's addicted to painkillers. And they also had intelligence that Hillary Clinton was having meltdowns behind the scene and throwing things at people. And,
that part I knew.
Yeah. And so, that like they could have, if they really wanted to help Trump win, they would have released that, but they didn't, right? They chose not to. And that was a big part of the thing. So it's like Hillary Clinton's done. She's got no political future whatsoever at this point. I mean, now that that's in official government documents and all of that, that basically the whole world knew she was crazy and was like, all the intelligence, not just Russia, but the whole world was kind of doing intelligence research about our next president, saw that our next president was nuts, a drug addicted, mentally ill, psychotic woman. I mean, so, I mean, it was just, she's done. So I expect they will release a lot on the Epstein, connection with the Clintons, because there's no danger in that. They're out, they're finished. The Clintons are done, right? They're finished, right? And there may be a couple other people that will fall from the Epstein thing, but Pam Bondi's going through there. She's able to delete things based on national security interests. And so we're not going to get the whole Epstein files. But the fact that Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene had that falling out, and now he's calling her Marjorie Traitor Greene, right? And like the Fuentes universe, there's some 3D chess going on where it's like the Democratic Party apparatus and the mainstream media, they're trying to dismantle MAGA. So they've found like the more sincere elements in MAGA, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and, and stuff. And they're kind of boosting them as a way to like kind of dismantle the MAGA coalition. And we're noticing that. And I will say something very, very, very unnatural is happening with Nick Fuentes. I've never seen anything like this, right?
What do you mean? Explain.
Well, I mean, Nick Fuentes.
And by the way, I'm not a Nick Fuentes fan, just to be very
I am not either. And
yeah.
Nick Fuentes, there's mainstream media, like, I mean, Bill Maher had a whole like sketch on his show recently just about Nick Fuentes, and like,
really?
Yeah. And it's like they are boosting this guy who is an internet racist and an internet extremist. They are boosting him and making him, they want him everywhere. And it's not people who agree with him. It's like they've chosen him to be the face of a certain form of dissident politics. And that makes me wonder. And I ask questions because, we've seen some weird things happen. Like, for example, the Charlottesville events, right? In the lead up to Charlottesville, right? White nationalists protesting to save a Confederate monument, the leftists protesting against the white nationalists. That's like the oldest that has happened. But in the lead up to it, it blew up like you wouldn't believe. It was everywhere. All of a sudden, go to Charlottesville, and every Trumper in the country was getting emails. Go to Charlottesville. It's the most important thing. And every leftist in the country was getting emails. It's going to be the biggest thing. You got to go there. And everyone went to Charlottesville. And instead of having an army of cops between the two sides were just kind of left right next to each other. And it's not like it was all a big conspiracy that people weren't told what to do. But if you put, if you blow something up so everyone from both sides convenes in an area, and then you don't put security, and what happened, right?
Right.
And January 6th was also a similar thing. Again, Trump said, I'll meet you at the Capitol. It was a huge thing. And then conveniently, the doors of the Capitol were left open, and, and there were FBI informants there, and look what happened. I mean, it looks to me, and then there's also weird things like, before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, right? You'll notice that there was a South Park episode about him right before he was assassinated. And all of a sudden, I mean, he's been part of the Trumposphere, Turning Points USA, but they started blowing him up, like giving him a huge amount of attention before then he got killed in Salt Lake City. And is that a coincidence? Maybe it's that people were more aware of him, so the killer was more aware and did it. I don't know. But I'm seeing what they're doing with Nick Fuentes right now, and I feel like it's unnatural. The people that would normally not give somebody like that the time of day or attention are blowing up Nick Fuentes. They want people to pay attention to Nick Fuentes and see him and all of that. And I almost feel like something's going to happen. Okay. Something's going to happen. Part of it is they're trying to dismantle MAGA, right? And that they see, that they have their Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nick Fuentes are both, more sincere in their MAGA sentiments than Trump is. And they're dismantling it. They're like an argument against MAGA. But part of me, I feel like something is planned. Like there's going to be some kind of, something that will fall out, and they want eyes on Nick Fuentes when it happens. They want everyone seeing him as the face of something. I will say the other thing part of the reason I hate Nick Fuentes in particular is that there's just that tone of voice that he uses. He's an asshole. He's a swarmy, sarcastic, he's not, there are people with that point of view. I don't agree with that point of view, who articulate it in a sincere way, who sound like, I believe this, whatever. He doesn't, right? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for a long time, he called her Large Marge. That's what he called her. He called her fat. He dug into the fact, that she's divorced, and there was, he got into all these details about her private life, and she's divorced, and I don't care. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like for a while, it was like this whole thing. He was like going after her on like a personal level. It's insult comedy. It's personal attacks, and and the use of slurs, you know, and kind of normalizing the use of slurs and all that.
Yeah.
He's not a political leader. He's like a shock jock, right? He's a shock jock
Yes.
who, yeah, and he trains a layer of young men that are opposed to the establishment to think that's the way one should talk about politics. And if you're not part of his little bubble, and you know, to most people that are not part of his little internet bubble, if someone walks around and talks that way, has that sarcastic, rude attitude, insults people, you're an unpleasant person. No one wants to be around. But they get the young men kind of sucked into this internet bubble where they think that's a cool way to be, and that's just a way to be. And he just plays a very, very negative role, in my view. That he's not. He's just kind of cultivating people to be assholes. I just don't see him as. You know, it's one thing to be wrong politically, but I think there are people that agree with him politically that don't cultivate their audience to be, you know, rude, negative, you know, and all of that. And then I'm seeing something very, very unnatural with the way all of a sudden they're blowing him up. And again, they are trying to dismantle MAGA, but I worry that they're setting us up for something else, right? They're planning something like they want Nick Fuentes to be the face of this type of politics when something happens, right? You know, they wanted January 6th to be, that was the moment that we all learned to hate MAGA because they went into the Capitol, right? Charlottesville, you know, it was like we were all psyched up that Trump is a dangerous president because there was this riot. Well, you know, and I feel like they're planning something, and I don't quite know exactly what they're planning, but you know, they suddenly, a lot of people who don't like Nick Fuentes are going out of their way to give him attention and put eyes onto him, which is a very odd thing because he's just this fringe internet racist who's been around for forever. I mean, he's just, you know, he's this fringe internet racist who's been around from the beginning of time. But now I see they're really, really blowing him up. Why? And I urge people to ask why, you know.
If I had to guess, you know, everybody likes the guy who's in opposition to the person who you don't like, who's on their same side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Marjorie Taylor Greene has been getting a lot of press from, let's say, the left, or let's say from Democrats, because she's been going after Trump so hard on the Epstein thing. Trump is 39 points underwater on the Epstein issue. His polling has dropped from to 38% or some insane low number. So he's been taking a hit, right? And they're playing up this split in MAGA, this war in MAGA, as they call it. So you get the Tucker Carlsons of the world, the Nick Fuentes of the world, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, who are effectively like, hey, this doesn't look like MAGA to me. Like, this doesn't look like America First. This looks like something else. This looks like you're catering to Israel. This looks like you're catering to your oligarch friends. And, you know, if you're a Democrat, whether you agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nick Fuentes, or Tucker Carlson or not, you look at that and say, hey, we like to fight that there's a fight taking place there. So let's boost this. Let's amplify the fact that there's a fight that's taking place in MAGA on this issue with these big names. Like, I can kind of see it. I mean, the way it's breaking down, you may not be wrong that something may take place and they want Nick Fuentes to be the face of it. I would warn them, though, be careful what you ask for. Now, the reason why I say that is if Fuentes takes this anti-imperialist or anti-capitalist tone, that is going to draw numbers. Meaning you are cutting into a Democratic base that you might not have otherwise been able to cut into if you had not amplified the person in that case, especially if he's consistent, right? If he's like, hey man, we're not making it any better. Republicans seem to only care about the rich. Democrats only seem to care about immigrants. Okay, well, you may actually get a slice of people who may not pay attention to the racist, bigoted, asshole persona. They may just accept the things that you're saying. Think of the Bernie base. I'll give you a good example. Bernie Sanders. When it became clear that they cheated Sanders, and you got all of these people, I think it was like many of these people just stayed home. It's like, I'm not getting involved in this. You guys cheated my guy. I'm going to hate you forever for this. What if you have a voice like Fuentes at the exact same time that that's taking place? That's this kind of, I don't like these wars. We don't give in too much to the oligarchs, etc. Does he pull that base? Maybe. Like, meaning they better be careful what they ask for if that's the case. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I want to mention this. I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. You know, when we think of like the left, like socialists and communists, and then we think of the right, right, of, you know, the far right, you know, racists, fascists, or whatever, there's a layer of people that are in this area, this space that is like somewhere in between. For example, you know, like Julius Evola, right? Julius Evola is this Italian intellectual, was kind of made famous by the Mussolini government, was a critic of the Mussolini government because it wasn't conservative enough. And he was this Italian intellectual, and he wrote Revolt Against the Modern World, and he wrote Man Among the Ruins, and he was this Italian far right intellectual. When he was quoted by Steve Bannon, right? Steve Bannon quoted him in a speech, and it became like a big thing in the New York Times. I went to go buy, I figured I'm going to go read what Julius Evola had to say. So I went to go look, and you know who publishes Julius Evola's books in America? It's a company headquartered in Burlington, Vermont, that publishes yoga manuals. And I thought, this is odd, right? This is supposed to be this big fascist, but who publishes their stuff? It's a yoga company, a yoga book publishing company. But why is that? Well, Julius Evola was one of the leading experts on Eastern religion and Hinduism,
Really?
and yeah, and that, you know, so Julius Evola, and if you read his writing, he has this whole like, you know, he looks at the religions of the East. He looks at the caste system in India. He looks at Tibetan Buddhism and things like that. And he says, oh, this is more traditional. Everything's in balance. And that there's, you know, I remember during Occupy Wall Street, it was just like every one of these kind of like mystical new age communities kind of came out, right? And there's a bunch of them, right? You know, whether it's Hindu origin, the Krishna movement, or there's like yoga, and there's like Tibetan Buddhism, and there's different like breakaways from Buddhism and all of this. And that there's a lot of these kind of like new age, mystical, occult kind of politics where it looks like hippies, right? Which we associate with the left, but their beliefs tend to be quite, you know, what you, if you read what they really believe, their beliefs tend to be kind of far right, like theosophy. Have you ever heard of theosophy? Right?
Yeah.
Theosophy is a religious movement that, you know, again, it's associated with hippies, like all the world's religions are one, and all of this. But if you actually look at theosophy, communism is the main enemy, right? We have to mobilize to defeat communism, and communism is the main target. And we're trying to bring the world back in balance. We're trying to defend tradition. And there's a lot of this. There's a lot of this like kind of mystical stuff that is put in the left-wing category by, you know, just by the hippie counterculture, by the 60s revolution. They're not Christian. They don't look like traditional conservatives. They glorify Eastern religion and things like that. But they also, the foundations of their beliefs are communism is the main enemy, and we want to restore the world to a kind of a traditional way, right? So there's a layer of that. And, you know, when I think about Nick Fuentes and the way he's pushing things, you know, like one of the leading Nazis after the Second World War in Europe was this woman named Savitri Devi. And she wrote a book called Lightning in the Sun. And she was a woman, a European woman who converted to Hinduism and was all about the Hindu faith, and believed that Hitler was the incarnation of, I think, was it the god, one of the gods, Krishna or something like that. And that, you know, there's a layer of like hippie kind of people that their beliefs have a lot in common with the far right. When it really gets down to it, right? And that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't fit what we understand about the political spectrum at all, right? But there are a layer of people that are new age in their orientation, that are mystical, that are quite critical of Western civilization, that are arguably anti-Christian. They view Christianity as like a religion of the weak, or a scam, or whatever, you know, but also very, very anti-communist, very conservative, and often have oddly, you know, I mean, when it comes to, you know, they'll talk about the Israel lobby, they'll talk about, you know, they kind of have a narrative where, you know, Western civilization is being corrupted from within by, you know, Israel and Zionists, you know, and it's, those folks are generally considered to be on the left because they're multicultural, right? They're not European, and they admire the East, but their beliefs are kind of, you know, in line with, you know, I mean, if you really sat them down, I don't think they would disagree with Nick Fuentes on that much, right? Even though, you know, they wouldn't be white nationalists, I guess, because they're all about non-white people and non-white religions and all of that. But their beliefs about Western civilization being corrupted from within, and communism being the greatest enemy, and, you know, their beliefs kind of don't stray that much from what people on the far right believe, even though it expresses itself in this very liberal cultural way. And that's one thing that is kind of strange, and that was one aspect of the new left that people talked about. I mean, the Hare Krishna movement in India are considered the far right, because they are fanatically Hindu religious, right? And they're very anti-communist, and it's, and all that. But in America, Hare Krishna is considered to be a leftist movement because they're, they go to peace rallies and they dance around and they wear orange robes or whatever, and it's kind of weird how politics works. And that's what I noticed during Occupy Wall Street is upstate New York is full of these kind of esoteric religious communities that are left, but not left. I don't know. I mean, we call them left because culturally in America, left is a cultural phenomenon of like you're worldly and you question the West and, and you're open-minded or something, but their beliefs are not left in, they don't believe in dialectical and historical materialism. They're certainly not communists. And they, they're kind of, their religion almost tells them they must be at war with communism. So I don't know, we're in a weird place. And, there is, what does left mean? What does right mean? I mean, I think Nick Fuentes, I mean, he kind of just calls out the, what do they call it? The emperor has no clothes. I mean, Israel gets a free pass, right? I mean, they do. And so it's not hard to just get up there and show that Israel gets a free pass. And that's a taboo thing to say on the right, but it's true. And that people that are serious and actually engage with right-wing ideas can see that, we give Israel a free pass on a lot of things. People can see that, and that, Israel first is not consistent with America first. And he's made his career pointing out what should be obvious, and what is obvious to a lot of people, but is just kind of forbidden in mainstream media. He's made his career doing that. We're just going to see how this develops. I don't know what's going to happen. I will tell you, my organization, Center for Political Innovation, we're trying to navigate all of this. It's a very confusing political terrain that we're in. But we just have to stick with our principles, right? We're opposing the danger of a new world war. We're opposing the emerging low-wage police state. We want peace with Russia, China. We want a government of action that fights for working families, and you just stick to your principles. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, there's all this political confusion out there. You just got to stick to your principles.
Yeah, no, Caleb, that is a damn good point. Let me get one last question with Venezuela before I let you go.
Sure. So
some of the reporting has pointed out that Donald Trump is apparently, quote unquote, open to having additional dialogue with Maduro. This is a bit weird because the New York Times have reported that there was already dialogue with Maduro. Maduro offered apparently oil, resources, etc. The Trump administration turned them down. He offered to leave after a 2 to 3 year period. That's according to the New York Times. Who knows if that's true, right? For all intents and purposes, that could be stuff that's leaked into the media for political effect. But let's assume for the moment that it may be true. That was turned down. And so it's like, okay, so what else are you having a conversation with him about? He's given you pretty much everything, and you've already said no. Now, this is apparently being pushed by Marco Rubio, who effectively, Miami Cubans, has a hard on against Cuba, Venezuela, etc., who wants Trump to take military action to take territory effectively. Now, this seems like it's going to be chaos, but the U.S. has pulled Puerto Rico and has been reinvigorating the base in Puerto Rico. They've been having military exercises apparently in the jungles in some of these countries. And a report came out that 25% of all deployed U.S. warships are close to Venezuela at this point. This doesn't seem like just pressure. It seems like it's something else. But give me a take on this. I could be wrong.
I mean, I maintain that the Trump administration doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't know what they want to do and is probably internally divided about it. Yes. I feel like if they were going to demobilize, if they decided to do that, they'd be doing that already. But if they had decided fully they were going to strike, they would have struck already, or they would have attacked. And the fact that the New York Times unleashed this week, I mean, just they really want regime change in Venezuela, right? And the Machado Freedom Manifesto and it's like there's a faction, and it almost looks like desperation. They're afraid they won't get it, right? We're as close as we've ever been to a military confrontation with Venezuela. it looks to me like there's a real fear that it just won't happen, and they're getting a little desperate, and they really want to make sure it happens. And I really hope it doesn't. And I mean, it would be an absolute disaster for the region. And Trump's approval ratings are really, really low. And if he starts a new war, he's going to be even less popular. That would be an absolute disaster. And I feel like the Trump White House, to some degree or other, they're smart enough to just realize we won't benefit from this politically. I don't think they care about the Venezuelan people or all of that. I think it's just that there is a big section of the White House team that's just saying, if we do this, we lose politically, right? And they realize that, and they just don't want to, they just don't want to take the risk. And then there are some that just say, no, that's, it is an obsession. It is an important part of the far right. It is an important part of the Trump political movement, is the Miami Mafia, the Miami Cuban crowd, the anti-communist fanatical exile communities. We're going to do this, and they can't decide if they're going to do it or not. And they don't know. And honestly, I think a lot of it, the Epstein files may have something to do with it, and what comes out related to they're waiting for that, the fallout for that, and the negotiations with Russia. Russia and Venezuela are very close, right? And that if the USA attacks Venezuela, what can they do with Russia, and how's that going to affect them at the negotiating table? It's all tied into everything else. It's all a deal, I will say. It's not a matter of principle by any means. I think it's just there's a compromise, a negotiation taking place about what will ultimately happen, and we shall see. I mean, I think it would be an absolute disaster for the USA to attack Venezuela, I mean, the facts are not there. I mean, they're talking about drug gangs that don't even exist anymore. I mean, you look at the detail, the whole thing is just completely fake, and everyone can see that. Yeah. And so are they going to go actually strike to make Marco Rubio happy, or are they going to, just start to back away? They don't know.
How do you back away at this point? I mean, like, it looks absurd either way you look at it, right? Like, you've put all of this military hardware in the area. You've threatened, you've browbeat, you've done all of this stuff.
Yeah, well, you need the media conversation to change, to not be looking at you backing away, right? And again, that's kind of like Ukraine. Trump has to be able to back away in a way that doesn't look like he's retreating, that doesn't look weak. The fact that he said he's open to talking to Maduro, like they've already talked, right? And that's been revealed, but the fact that he said that, he's trying to give himself an out. That's what that looks like to me, right? He's trying to say, okay, well, I can end this by saying I got Maduro to make some huge concession. He's almost trying to give himself an out of like, oh, well, we're open to talking. Well, anyone who knows the details knows they've been talking this entire time. And, but that's, maybe that looks to me like Trump is trying to give himself an out. And we'll see. I mean, hands off Venezuela. I mean, this shouldn't be happening. And the other thing is that Venezuela is getting way more support than they would normally be getting because Trump is doing it, right? Colombia is ready to fight on the battlefield for them. Like, all of Latin and South America is lining up. Europe is against the attack. And I mean, it's like Venezuela is actually, because Trump is so hated internationally, they're getting a lot of sympathy they would not normally be getting. So I mean, it's lined up that if Trump actually does attack, he's going to be widely castigated for it, and the result is going to be instability, and it'll be disastrous, and everyone will be able to see that. So we'll see.
Do you think Russia gets involved in this?
No, there's already Russian military contractors in Venezuela. They've already got a huge amount of Chinese military hardware. Colombia says they will fight. Colombia's military will fight the United States, and they'll get involved on Venezuela's side. So I mean, Russia, would Russia send its actual military into Venezuela? I don't think so, because a direct military exchange between U.S. troops and Russian troops, that's World War III then. But I think Russia's already involved, and that Russia would militarily support Venezuela. They already are. I mean, at this point, Russia's heavily involved in supporting Venezuela.
Caleb, awesome breakdown. I always appreciate these conversations. Your knowledge and your breadth of knowledge of this stuff is just always impressive to me.
Well, I always enjoy coming on. It's always fun. We have great conversations. We have a level of depth here that you don't find anywhere else. So we get the whole story and we dig deep into it. So good stuff.
Thank you for that. Caleb Maupin, he's speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. Caleb is director for Center for Political Innovation. check him out. Check out his organization. Check out his channel on YouTube. That's the other one. You're also on YouTube channel under the same name, Caleb Maupin. Caleb, man, thank you for this. You be safe,
Sure.
okay?
You too. Good luck.
Thank you. All right. Shout out to Caleb. We've had a good show today. We had a really good show. Caleb, John Helmer, both were really good guests. That was the first time John Helmer was on the show. He was very gracious in accepting my invitation, and I deeply appreciate him for doing so. I've tried to get a few more specialists on Russia. Mark is a fantastic guest. What is his name? Michael Maloof. He's also a really good guest and an analyst on it. But, obviously, the more guests you have that can cover a particular topic, the better off you are. Not to mention, it stabilizes the show, in essence, in case any one particular guest stops. So, John was awesome. Yeah, John was amazing. John was a really good guest. It's funny. Like I said, I've been reading Dances with Bears for a while. And you would listen to his commentary and you would listen to his breakdown and you'd just be sitting there like, keep going. Just go on. Explain more. And obviously you're trying to prod to get the information out because prodding allows a person to kind of explain and communicate it. But no, John is a fantastic guest. John Helmer is an awesome guest. He really is. John is a font of information. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Well-researched and disciplined conversation. Well, thank you, Nick Riviere. I appreciate that, especially coming from a PhD. So, yeah, Ben is much more insightful. Who is Ben? I don't know who Ben is. Caleb gives a different realistic perspective. Yeah, Caleb is really good, too. Caleb is fantastic. His knowledge of just... Caleb would bring up stuff that took place like in 1842, so-and-so took place. And you're just sitting there like, wow, why do you know that? I dance with a light whip with bears. No, I don't go out now. It Dances with Bears is a really good site. It's a really good site. Dimitri Simes Jr. Now, I don't know who Dimitri Simes Jr. is, but I would look it up. I will look it up. Dimitri Simes Jr. Now, I guess the operative question is, who is Dimitri Simes Jr.? It's like, I don't know that guy. Who is that guy? For Andre, who is Andre? A little too woke? Really? You think this audience is too woke? Okay, fair enough. That's not what I would, that's not the definition I would ascribe to this audience, but okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Being knowledgeable is no reflection of integrity and honesty. True. One must know the difference to discern options from facts, opinion from facts. Agreed. That's like me saying never mistaken coherent for truthful. Like, meaning just because an argument is coherent doesn't mean the argument is right. No, fair enough. Yeah. Cheers to Gonzalo Lira for starting these lives. Well, get Nima. I don't know who that is. Okay, let's go to the chat real quick because I don't want to miss these. If it's that important, at Boycott Works, super chat. Okay, I don't know the context for that. Alexander, first and foremost, thank you, Alexander. I appreciate your super chat. I need a little bit more context. Thanks for Thanks for having Caleb on so long. He's very interesting. Caleb is a really good guest, Red Axis. He really is. He's a damn good guest. And he's always been good to the show. Like, meaning he's always been open to coming on to the show. And I've always appreciated him for doing so. So, no, he's been really good. Jamal, try to get in touch with Dimitri Simes Jr. Arcane Eclectic. I will try to do that, even though I don't know who that person is. I will look that person up first, and I will try to get in contact with them and see if they join. Get Nima Parv Iniak, academic agent, elite theorist. An elite theorist. He's not just a regular theorist. Elite theorist. That's pretty ballsy. Like that's a heavy hurdle, right? No, sir. I'm not a therapist. Theorist. God damn it, I'm an elite theorist. I'm an elite theorist. Okay. Badass. Nima. Nima is the one that's on Dialogue Works, right? Or are you talking about somebody else? You're talking about a different Nima. You may be talking about a different Nima. I think the one is spelled Nima. Yeah. Nominata Love Andre plus I Gen X. What is this? Kay and Kirsten. No, we're not. I love Andre. Plus, I'm Gen X. And I had Silent Generation parents who is Caribbean Silent Generation. Dimitri is a Russian expert. Oh, I see. So is his father. Fair enough. He does theories on how elites rule. Oh, I see. Okay. I misunderstood. I bet you meant like, I am a top echelon theorist, as opposed to I am a theorist who cover elites. Okay, fair enough. My bad. I'm joking him. That's Nima. Oh, I see. Different Nima. Al Korshkit. I never knew his last name. Korshkit. A guy can't help how his voice sounds. Oh, you're talking about Nick Fuentes. You know what's funny? When I can divorce what a person says and how good the person is, if that makes sense. Like, I think Alex Jones is a nut job. But he's good at what he does. And I'm saying that as somebody who, on every blue moon, would see something that Jones puts out. And I remember there was one day, it was when Donald Trump attacked Syria. I never forget it. Jones comes on the show and he gives a 30 to 40-minute monologue off the top of his head, and it's gold. And I'm sitting there like, holy shit. Like, I'm impressed. Like, I'm looking at him like legitimately impressed. It's kind of like it's like when you do a particular job, you can kind of, you get the mechanics of it when you do it for a living. And when you have to come out and perform constantly and do that job, and if your job is talking, especially talking about these type of topics, and you see somebody else also do it, you can be impressed. It's almost like a singer looking at another singer. And it's like, it is not, I've had to do shows. It's on a radio show, and even on this one, where you had to fill time, you had to cover, because either somebody didn't show up, or something went bizarre in the show, or maybe there's breaking news, and you're covering breaking news. And so you have to be able to talk off the top of your head, basically extemporaneously, about something. And it needs to fill time for a particular time frame. I don't know if that's a skill. I don't know if that's just something that people can do. I don't know what that is. But it is not like, filing taxes, right? Like, when you're filing taxes, you're like, okay, I'm supposed to put this number in the slot, and I'm supposed to put this number in this slot. It doesn't work that way. There are times where it works. There are times where it doesn't work. And, I guess it's kind of like a muscle where if you have to do it all the time, you get better at it over the course of time, just because you do it all the time. But that is not, that is like a magical process. Like, that next word, you don't always know, right? It's like, it's a stream of consciousness that you are almost like riding a wave in the way that you're kind of going along with it when you're discussing a particular topic like that and talking about it, especially when it's off the top of your head. And to watch Jones do it, and he is on a tear, and he is putting a knife in Trump over this, and he is like getting worked up, He's getting excitable. He's getting angry. He's like losing his shit. But it's a controlled burn all the way through. And I'm sitting there like, A, he's making sense. B, the argument works. And C, he is keeping it consistent all the way through. You're like, that's impressive. Now, I don't know what he does on a regular day, right? Because I don't watch InfoWars. I just know that day he was on his ball. I say that to say, when Fuentes is on a tear, it works. The voice works. The dickishness works. This kind of sarcastic asshole quality. When there are moments where it works. Now, I got to be honest with you. I don't watch Nick Fuentes. I only see random clips that tend to get amplified when they come online or something like that. And it's like, whoa, he said that. But I would imagine those clips are amplified because those are moments where it works. You know, it's not the moments he's being racist. He's using N-word or he's, doing this other stuff. No, man. Yeah, it's sometimes the stuff works. It divorced from whatever they're saying. So, I know Caleb is like, I don't like, he's like, I can't stand that asshole. Fair enough. Accept it, right? But there are moments where people are hitting their stride. And when they hit their stride, all of that stuff comes together in a coherent way. So, fair enough. Fair enough. Louise Brooks, the government is open. I finally got paid. Congratulations, Louise Brooks. It should have never been a situation where you weren't getting paid. And that goes to anybody in general as a just flat fact. The idea that this government spends this much money on just random shit, and the amount of money that we give out, the amount of money that we give in regards to the oligarchs and all this other stuff, the amount of money we spend on wars, all of this stuff. And then we can't pay people, get out of here. No, Louise Brooks, thank you for that. The government is open and finally got paid, sharing the love. I so appreciate you. Always a great show. Not always, but today was a really good show. Thank you, Louise. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I often tell you, you guys make this show what it is, and I mean it. By the way, hit like if you indeed dig the content and dig the show. Share the content. You can always support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, memberships, PayPal, etc. All of those things helps the show be what the show is. It helps the show grow. I've pointed out before, I really want to get a producer. And for that, the show needs to continue to grow. So that is my objective. That is my goal. Let's see. Iron Gantz. Alexander Jones is a Zionist. Yes, he can talk, but he still invests into that garbage. Yeah, agreed. Again, I am divorcing what the person says from how the person is doing, if that makes sense. Like Mel Gibson may be somewhat of a trash human being, and yet Mel Gibson can make a good movie. I can divorce the fact that he's, I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to, I'm breaking it into two parts. The capability of a person to deliver whatever they're doing and whatever their product is. So Alex Jones is giving a product, and his delivery of that product is part of the product. The product is trash. So don't misunderstand me, right? Like when he's talking to gay frogs and all this other nonsense. So just to be very clear. All right. We have come to the end. Would say anybody can get on a public bus? For the most part, as long as you're not carrying or doing something insane. I mean, well, you have to have clothes. I don't think you can go ass out onto a public bus. At least I don't think you can. I could be wrong. It depends on the place, I suppose. I can respect that divorce. Boycott works. Well, thank you, boycott works. Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to make a distinction between the two. It's like you can watch somebody who is doing something and they're doing it proficiently. whatever they're doing is something else. It's just the notice that they're doing it proficiently, right? Those are two different things. Hey, frog was proven to be true by a black professor, but okay. Hey, frog was proven to be true. Oh, the gay frog thing. Yeah, I guess my thing is, why, of all the things that could be discussed, why is the gay frog thing the thing that he picked up? It's just weird. Yeah, Jones is out of his goddamn mind, but sometimes it should make sense. No one is correct 100% of the time. We're all human, Jamal Thomas. That is true about car works. That's true. Very true. Have a bike, no insurance. Do you need insurance to ride a bike? Israelis hate Mel Gibson with a passion. Yes, they do. Well, that's the wild part, right? The whole Jews kill Christ. Like there's some Christians that are hard ass on that stuff. And they blame the Jews for it. I can argue with them other things, but I believe in the gay frogs. Fair enough. Okay, what about the lizard people stuff? The lizard people. My friend has a PhD on the subject. I think you guys are missing the point. I think you guys are missing my point. Look, I get that fish can change sex. I get it. Changing sex doesn't make them gay. It means they've changed sex. There's a difference in those things. Pretty sure it was the Romans that killed Christ. Yes, it was. It was the Romans that killed Christ. Yes. Yes. The Jews turned him in, but it was the Romans that did it. Yes. Yeah. All right. We have come to the end. And I need to, what time is it? Okay. And I want to get this over before they close. Shout out to John Helmer, man. I so appreciated that conversation. He's so good. He's so good at what he does. Lizards, not sure. Yeah, I don't buy the lizard people stuff. That's a bit much to me. That's a bit much to me. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I want to say subscribe. If you really dig the content, you could support it. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, etc. Memberships, all those things help. And I'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow. I'm going to hit Lath, see if Lath is going to join me. Colonel Wilkerson is going to be on tomorrow. I need to get at 8 o'clock. But beyond that, Repo Man is a badass movie, by the way. No, it's a good movie. It's a good movie. There's a scene, what do you say? I burn my tomorrows and I stand here for today. And he goes on a killing spree. Oh, it's so good. So good. That scene is so good. That scene is so, so good. All right. Be safe. Be kind to the degree that you can be kind. I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one all.